All right. Hello and welcome back, everybody, to the Game Dev Show. Here with Dave, Jason, Andrew, and Yorai today. We'll be talking about game development, Unity development, some new games that have come out, and there are quite a few different topics. We've been kind of talking about what we were going to cover during the pre-show warm-up time, and we've got a lot of interesting things. So make sure you hang around with us. Hit the thumbs up button. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat or in the comments, and we'll hit them later. And just welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out here, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
So I wanted to start with a couple really quick announcements. First, I've put up Andreas set up a quick landing page for the upcoming conference that we're working on. If you're interested in that, there's a link down in the description. Just go to gamedevguild.com. I think right now it's doing a redirect. We're still working on going through getting the site all set up and stuff. So just hit that page and you'll be able to get a little bit more info. And then there should be some updates there throughout this week. So if you sign up there, you'll get info about it. But if you just refresh it throughout the week, you should see some new changes and info about what's happening and what's coming up. Also, with the mastermind groups for game developers, if you're interested in that, I'm going to be sending out the first couple group invites this week. And the plan is to send out, we're going to do 3 or 4 groups this week. And I'm going to record those calls, make them available for everybody who's coming into the system and joining their own group. So they'll have some examples of what the groups should run like and how to do things, and kind of gives a little bit of extra training material. So if you are interested in that, make sure you've already signed up. And if you get an email from me about it this week, make sure that you reply really quick, because the first set is just going to do one small round of people in this first week, and then we're going to expand out to everybody else next week, because we got to do like 100+ groups here. So I want to start small, make it as scalable as possible, and get it out so that everybody's group is functional and working. Again, game.courses/mm if you're curious about that. Outside of that, I released a video this morning on character customization. So if you want to do customizable characters for your games, you're just kind of curious some possible ways that works, you can check that out as well. And I believe Dave and Jason Story both have some new video releases to talk about and share. Who'd like to talk about what they've done first?
Shit, wrong way.
Okay, so Jason, why don't you tell everybody, you just made a new video yesterday, right?
I did. This one was a bit ad hoc. It was just something I was doing for myself, and I was like, you know what? Someone might find this interesting. So I kind of, it's not my usual slaving over a video for 3 weeks and like rewriting a script 100 times. This time I just pressed the button on OBS and said, let's have a look. And I talked through how I manage sources and all the various information that I sort of collect. I often get asked how I can sort of pull up a link to something pretty easily, and well, there you go. Watch that video and you'll find out.
And it's called How to Find Any Resource You're Looking For.
Yep.
So I'll link this in the chat and make sure that it's in the description as well. And then Dave, you want to really quickly tell everybody what your last video was?
Yeah, so I've been away for a few weeks, went back to Old Blighty, and while I was away, I put out a few videos. One was on the pixel display prototype for you, Jason, to finally finish your pixel display stuff.
It's still sitting right there.
Yeah, well, get it done. I put out the video, tell you how to do it. Then I done a sort of a video on the Next Mind, mind hacking sort of device, which I then spoke about how I had to fix it because my mind's broken, obviously, because it didn't work very well for me. So I put that out. And then the last one is the first part of a 2-part series, with the next one going out today, which is screen fading in URP using renderer features, because somebody asked me about that after a recent hackathon I was doing. Well, Game Jam, sorry, they don't call them hackathons anymore. Game Jam, where I was fading in and out. And yeah, somebody asked me how I did that. So that's there now.
Oh, yeah, nice. Well, yeah, I'll make sure that those are linked too.
Render features are the best thing that Unity decided to make since, like, at least... How early was when they introduced post-processing Stack 2?
Oh.
It's been like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while. And ever since I found them, I've been exploiting them for visual effects that are in a bit more of the advanced territory. There's these sets of effects that most action games use where an attack would take a character out of their scene and replace the background for something entirely else. And trying to get that effect in Unity without using multiple cameras tends to be a real mess. So what way you can do it is with renderer features, you can just render the two objects and whatever background you kind of want to have there, and just use that. But the nicer thing is that you can blend it properly or do weird masking. So one action game I've been playing a lot recently is Punishing Grey Raven, and they do this thing where when you dodge an attack, the entire screen would go tinted in a certain color, and anything that's and the game would enter like a bullet time, but you are still quick, and any unit that is slowed down is colored brightly, and the enemies can do this to you too, and you get colored brightly. So it's this nice kind of feature that's fun to think about how to implement in Unity, and render features make it just so simple. I can't go back.
Yeah, they're great. And for things like screen fading, they really do just, I mean, there's so many. Where it came up is I was watching a guy do a video and he was showing just a plane, that he had this geometry plane in front of him and he was using that to cut off the world. But the problem was, one, he had some post-processing going on. So you could see that post-processing on the plane, which was screwing it up. And the second was he had lights in his scene and that was bleeding in to the sides. So somebody mentioned, oh, well, do an inverted sphere. So then he created a geometry sphere and had it inverted. But this was a VR game. So then he brings his hands close to his face and they start clipping through the sphere. And then I was happened to be in there and I was like, look, just build a renderer feature and have it fade out so it just fades everything. And then somebody was like, well, then you can't have text overlay. And I went, well, no, then you just add a renderer feature afterwards that can do the text overlay on top of it. And it's a really nice, neat, easy solution. It just uses a couple of layers once you've implemented it and job done.
Yeah, and you can also layer them in whatever way you want. You can inject phases to say grab a pass early on and then use it later if you would really want to. They kind of try to get you to stop grabbing passes, but it's still doable entirely.
Mm. And in the video you see here, this is actually showing, this was a preview in the first one of the second one, which is a bit weird, but the second one that comes out today, I show how to customize the timeline as well. And that's where you'll customize the timeline to have the screen fade come in and change the color of the screen fade if you want. And it shows you, if you're not interested in screen fading, you could just watch it to see how to customize the timeline, which is kind of handy. But yeah, I'll go through all the code and put it out there. So
yeah, and also your buttons for testing were really handy there.
Oh, what, the quick buttons to put on an override inspector? Yeah, I do it for everything because it's just so quick. The amount of times you watch people and they'll build an entire game. Well, they're building a game and then they want to test something, but they have to go through a whole section of the game to get to it. And that might just be a menu transition or something like that, or transition to level. Whereas you can just put a button on there that says do the transition so I can see how it looks. And that's what I do for screen fading and stuff like that, with some post-processing or actions where I can basically press a button and see how it looks immediately and then go, yeah, that works, it's great. And then it's in the area of the game that it wants to be and I don't have to travel all the way in. It's the same with, I have a video on direct play, which is where if you're building a level and you're doing something in the level that doesn't have all the bits like the player and all the rest, I show you how to literally, when you press play, it brings prefabs in, and then actually those prefabs have your player and they have all the rest. So you can play the level immediately without having to go through the entire menu system and the start screens and all the rest to build your prefabs to then come out into your level. So I show you how to do that in another video. Can't remember what it's called, but it's in there somewhere.
Do you guys all do something similar like that with your level setups, by the way? Because I know like the system that Dave uses is something very similar to what I do, the one that he talks about in that video. There's one, do you guys do something similar with your own systems if you're building a game with multiple levels where you auto load in the pieces and have that separated? Or do you guys have a workflow process for that, either of you or any of the three of you?
So I tried that approach once in my life and I ended up deciding against it because I like to have my scenes isolated to only the things they need to have, and I just additively load scenes if I need to. So I do have scripts that say, for debug purposes, load these other scenes. And I only run this debug script if the scene I'm in is the active scene. So I end up with a very clean script that says, you are only running in debug, and you are loading these other scenes as soon as I enter. And I can change whatever is in there, and I don't have to rely on hard code approaches to loading whatever is required. So if I'm testing a UI only scene and I only need a mock object and not a full player, I can use that instead. This is the approach I currently favor. I also have scripts that say, if you're not the active scene, disable these objects. And then whatever in the actual game load order, you usually have a bootstrap scene that like has its own runtime scene elements and nothing else. So I know that all of the scenes I'm testing will never be the active scene in actual gameplay. Therefore, this script works perfectly for me. So I can have a camera in a UI scene, but I'll never use this actual camera in the actual gameplay.
That makes sense.
In my case, most of what I write tends to be system designs and things. So I can get away with a combination of unit testing and context menus. So kind of similar to what we were saying earlier. Anytime, like for example, in the Battler project, I wrote some code, and one of the things I added to it, which I'm currently doing, is like animations for the UI elements to come in and out. It's not done yet, but it's the kind of plumbing's in there. And every one of the UI elements has a right-click option to show, hide, turn off, turn on, just a context menu. So for those kinds of tests, I do that to kind of test single components. When it comes to testing something in like a proper integration test with the scene, all the characters and stuff, I'm very squirrely with how it's very different in a build than it is in editor. So from my perspective, testing it in editor is insufficient. Either the code is simple enough I can test it by just testing it by clicking a menu option or by running a unit test, or it's more complicated than that. I want to test it integration, in which case I want to build. I don't want to give myself a half test in the editor. And so what I've done is sort of a halfway house of both ideas. I have a big button at the top right beside the play button that says build. And when you press that button, it will automatically make a build, put it in a folder, press play, run it, and open it. And then I can test it, and it'll increment the version number. And so I can do that as like a real test. It's a little bit longer than a quick test, but that's sort of the proper one.
I have the same thing in mind. So where I've got the direct play, when you're just running an editor and you just want to see what the timings are like and all the rest of it. And then, I have a button that has the build. I also have an argument system that I can basically put arguments and launch them into the build, so that if I want to test a particular level, I can have it automatically see the arguments and just boot the level, so I don't have to do the menu either and just get straight into that level in build if I want, or I can run through the build as normal.
Do you use the actual arguments array that Unity provides, or do you do your own parameter system?
Yeah. Same way you do any sort of C# application.
Because that's just a side note for people who don't know. There is like the standard execution string array that is your object parameters that comes in when you do a public static void main in anything. They're there in Unity as well. Like you can actually access the args array. It's just not super useful. There's just not a lot of use cases where you want to run Unity with super different parameters outside of like
testing.
Yeah, pretty much. And in those cases,
I've done it for like allowing them to customize or specify a certain file, some mini customization stuff.
I do it in
once you start
enterprise.
Doing that, you want something more powerful, though. I think is the point, right? Like they're like at best, I will use them for like the run parameters in different builds of a Steam build. Because for if you deploy to Steam, you have to choose the exe and then you choose the command arguments, and so you could have different SKUs with different settings to kind of customize or whatever. Other than that, I would probably build my own like side-loaded arguments or something.
There's actually another use case in what you exactly just mentioned. When you're in Steam and you want to join a friend and you launch the game in order to join, you can actually add an argument into the launch process so that you know what friend to join. Because as you load your application, obviously Steam API doesn't automatically load with it. So you have to wait until the right time to call the join code. So it's provided as an argument.
On top of that, with the arguments program I wrote, I also added a thing that I can run the arguments in the editor. So things like you're talking about there, where you want to test launching with arguments with a player, but you want to do it in the editor or something like that, I can actually run the arguments in the editor as well. Again, using the system args.
Also, as some applications would have it, there are many arguments that you can use, not for your own code consumption, but for libraries that you are consuming. So, for example, with Terraria, we use XNA, but the Linux and Mac versions use FNA. And FNA has commands, arguments, for launching with OpenGL or Vulkan or what was the other third one? Metal. So by adding the arguments, you can change how the game runs, which is also why on Steam they let you change the arguments you have, because some games provide such power options.
Well, you guys want to move on to this game discussion that we were previewing before the call about everyone's favorite? I love that Salim's not here for this one. Elden Ring.
I really wish he was, but yeah. So, Elden Ring. I had a lot to say about last week's video, mainly because I played 24 hours of it by now, and having spent a day of my life playing this game, I feel a bit more entitled to my own opinions, having contested differing ones.
I played another 10 minutes, so I'm also qualified.
Yeah, definitely.
I got my 10 minutes in, and I could not get my damn controller to work. So I actually ordered a new controller just to try to get something to work, because as much as I wanted to play, I couldn't do it with the keyboard. It was just impossible.
I'm going to abstain because Euro's already had a massive conversation with me online about this, and yeah, he filled me in on everything.
DM. So, how do we even approach the beginning of this conversation? I guess, Andrew, your lever query.
Yes.
Yeah. So last week, to those who haven't watched, Salim and Andrew discussed Elden Ring, and Andrew began the game, and there's a point at which there is a room which seems to be empty for anything except a lever. And what most players are expected to do is to go to the center of the room where there is a pressure plate which will take you up. But you see, before you get to the center of the room, there is that level. And what the lever is supposed to do is, if you miss the elevator and it's at the wrong elevation, you can pull that lever to get the elevator back to you. But it is unusable if it is at your level. So that is one part of the problem. The lever was not interruptible because there was nothing to do with it.
Question, does this, because I saw Andrew's thing as well, does the lever actually move at all when you go to it, or does it just sit there? So it doesn't even go and make like a default, this is
you cannot interact with it.
You can't even try.
Oh.
And that's what confused me, because there was no option to try. I would expect what you're getting at is like, oh, try it, and it goes, you can't do it.
Yeah.
But there was nothing.
And on a note for like why this is bad as well, because it's worth highlighting. We've talked about this before. The term for this is affordance. So in the people will often use the door example because it's an easy one, which says that like or a bench affords sitting. A common mistake that people take with this though is it's like is what it's for. That's not what that means. Like a bench has an affordance for sitting, but so does like a sufficiently large rock. It's not that it is for that purpose. It is by looking at it and your understanding and contextualization of the world, it affords a certain kind of interaction. So something that is pushable affords pushing, something that's pullable affords pulling. And so the problem video games have as a genre in general is we have a lot of language in real world to look at stuff and go, you can sit on that, you could pick that up, you could throw that. There's an affordance for everything we see in the world. And so in games, you have to make things, and you're going to make things that look like real life stuff. And so there's a lot of affordances you can't do. So you have to have signifiers. as a game designer, because the entire world affords jumping and sitting and climbing and collecting, whatever, and there's a language between you and the player that says, you can't do these things. I'm sorry, I didn't have 5 million people to make every single item in this game interactable. We've chosen certain things to be interactable. And so you do that by signifying certain affordances. And then there's the language of the design and how you do this, and like you'll know it when you see it in terms of the probably my favorite example that people don't notice is scratches, because they're one of the best examples of if you see scratches on a wall, not only is that telling you that there's something there, and you're kind of attuned to find something and go, oh, that's different than that, that's interesting. But the scratches will not only tell you that it's interactable, it'll tell you something climbed this, therefore it is climbable, it affords climbing. And so it is both signifying and also, implying what you're going to do. So in this case, the struggle of this conversation is simply, there are things, some are gates, some are doors, some are pressure plates, but in a game that big, you don't know what's interactable. You can assume certain things are interactable, but if you watch enough playthroughs, you'll see people jumping into rocks that have invisible walls, or you'll see people trying to pick up things that aren't there, because it's very hard to know. And so you have to let people know. And this is a prime example of a failed affordance in this example.
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
it doesn't stop there, which is where the bigger problem starts. So even if you could use the level, apparently the hitbox the game expects you to be at the position where you can actually pull the lever, which means the opposite end of where it's at. You can't be near it and pull it. You pull to the other side. You have to be on the other side and press the button to pull. And it won't even give you the prompt to do so and snap you to that position, or tell you you can't actually click this now, you have to go to that position. It freaking doesn't show up. So anytime I see anything that looks to be interactable, I have to start going around all its sides just to pray the prompt
that's
comes
bad.
up. Yeah. And this is just like the first less than 10 minutes of the game. This is where it's at. Now, incidentally, what happened to me there was that I ran forward in this empty room and I clicked on the pressure plate and I thought, this is going to be a trap, just being a little bit hyper. And I ended up letting the elevator go up. Therefore, I ended up stuck and I had to use the lever. And I came up to the lever the same way I entered the room and I couldn't use it. And then I went to the other side of the lever and suddenly I could, which was incredibly frustrating. But I got through that pretty quickly. From there, I did actually start playing the game proper, quote unquote, and interacted with many of the game systems. And I just want to say that right from the get-go, this was absolute hell. But only on the usability front. The game is beautiful. The game has a lot of very fine-tuned moves, which are nice. But it starts at the main menu. Every game starts at the main menu, right? And one thing you'll find very early on is that the main menu expects you to be using a gamepad. How do you know? Well, it shows gamepad prompts. Even if you're on a keyboard and mouse, which I bought specifically on PC to play with, because I don't want to play on a gamepad. I hate playing on gamepads when I have the option not to.
And honestly, even if it wasn't the prompt, there's a very subtle design thing that will tell you this was built gamepad first, which is if you are the start button. When you press the start button, you go into a menu. There's sort of a language of enter and exit, right, or submit and cancel. And so there's many menus throughout the entirety of the game where the button that gets you into it is not the same button that gets you out of it. So you'll find yourself in scenarios where you've like opened a menu by pressing start and you press start again and it's like, no, that goes into another menu. It's like, no, I meant to like open and close it. That's what that button should do. But no, it kind of gets you into this weird scenario. If you actually try to quit the game, it's kind of comical. Like the number of steps you have to take to get back to the quit menu is like press start and then R2 and then like there's like 2 or 3 steps. Like you can't just press thing, quit, go. Like it's not a big deal, but it's death of 1,000 cuts, as they say, right? Like there's enough of these little things that are consistently like bad design choices.
Yeah, and on bad design choices. So I'm beginning the journey of explaining, but this game has a lot of problems with keyboard and mouse implementation being not even a second citizen, but the third one. It's like barely supported emulated control design decisions. And it starts at the main menu where you see gamepad prompts despite using a keyboard and mouse. Now, in most games, you'd expect that it would recognize what device you're using and show you the prompts for that, but it does not. Sure, fine. You can just expect that the buttons will do the things that they usually do. Escape goes back, it escapes. But this game doesn't have that. The game uses Q to go back. And the game won't ever show you that unless you go to the options. Cross to like the fourth tab, I think that was display and something. And then there's the prompts, and you have to manually select gamepad prompts. At which point, it will show you prompts. It will show you Q is back, F is submit, E also has one of these functions. It goes quite a long way there.
Oh,
But-
and by the way, if you do,
Yeah.
if you go in and change the prompts from the gamepad ones to the keyboard, and then realize it's horrible, and then try to plug in the gamepad, it won't switch them back to the gamepad. You now have to navigate back into the menus and put it back again. So,
I was surprised how long it took me to quit the game last time I played. It was a good 30 seconds just to quit the game. I wanted to just, like on my Mac, just Command Q to quit like a normal person, but instead you have to go to the menu, swipe over here, go down, click that, go to the menu, the main screen, which means sit through their ads for their studios for about 10 seconds, then click another button, to finally exit the game. It was very difficult.
So, on that note, just a bit of a tangent, but you can force quit the game, and this will quit instantly, way faster, and the game is really good at saving so that people don't cheat. So what ends up happening is the next time you boot the game up, it will tell you closed the game inappropriately. Please don't do that. You may lose some progress. Then it drops you in straight into the middle of whatever you were doing. If you were midair, you'll be midair. If you're in a boss fight, you'll still be in a boss fight with the sword straight on top of you, just waiting to fall down. So it's really good about that. It's like comically surprisingly good about keeping your progress when you're force quitting. But
by the way, speedrunners are already using that to their advantage. There's a couple. I've seen a speedrun. It's 2 hours and something, and there's 4 cases where they quit the menu for that exact reason because of the way it resets you back. It's the grab items without being hit by certain enemies by causing it to reset them back, but not entirely. So yeah, there's an interesting trick to that.
Yeah, in previous Souls games, there's this exploit where you don't want to deal with first encounters that tend to be a bit different for certain bosses. So what you'll do is you'll teleport outside as soon as the battle starts by whatever means necessary, and then the next time you come in, it's like you're retrying the fight. And in most first encounters, like if there's a dragon, it would be sleeping. But the next time you come in and go through the mist door that appeared after this first encounter, it will already be awake and available to fight proper. And sometimes this is advantageous for whatever reason. So yeah. Now, back on usability. Another thing that freaking infuriated me is the map. The big screen with all of these clickable points cannot be interacted with the mouse. You have to use the WASD to move yourself across the points, and then use F and Q to interact with, do you want to teleport there or not? And we're talking games 10 years back, 11 years even. Skyrim let you just drag the map across, do whatever you want, click whatever icon you want to fast travel. It's so much more intuitive. When you're shipping a keyboard and mouse supported... Let me step back a bit and say, the game should have had a warning that it has no proper keyboard and mouse support. Because this is subpar. And this, I would have expected, and hell, even accepted it if it was their first game. But this is not the first, this is not the second, not the third, and not the fourth. It's their 5th PC game. They have 6 games in this series. 5 of them are on PC. The standard has to be higher for usability for PC, in my opinion.
What's the let me ask, what's the controller like though to use?
So
In
the
comparison.
controller is a far more intuitive experience because they lay out UI in a way that befits a controller. For example, the classic Souls item swapping UI is shaped as a plus, where each button of the D-pad is responsible for swapping what item you're using.
Yeah, like it literally
And-
looks like a D-pad. Like I played
Yeah.
on gamepad and it was no issue whatsoever from that perspective. I don't want to say no issue because there was a lot of issues, but not specifically with the usability on that front.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
outside
so-
of controls, did you guys have other thoughts on it?
So the controls vary in usability levels, but the short gist is they are realistic to a less satisfying degree from a gameplay perspective. The game wants you to respect it, and it will make you work for it. Now, this is classic to the Souls formula. By design, your character is slow, realistic, and delays itself as it moves. It's expected. This is part of the game. Everything is balanced around it. Attacks are slow, and you have to time them properly. The game doesn't allow instant jump to dodge or whatever have you. But it does do some things for the player's favor, specifically in the terms of vertical movement. It is on the floaty side. What would happen is if you're not making a step entirely, the game would slide you up a tiny bit just so that you will make this necessary step. And this is especially noticeable with the mount that has a double jump. And this double jump can just slide on rocks, slide up, and away.
Although, speaking of the mount, here's another personal point of frustration. It's a small thing, but again, all of this stuff adds up. They give you the mount. It's like a narrative beat. At a certain point, you're given a thing. It's a ring that lets you summon your mount. Now, literally nobody playing this game is not going to be using the mount unless it's literally a speedrun category. It is like part of the game. And so this thing that you're given that's sort of core to the gameplay, they give you a thing and say, okay, there you go. Something in your inventory now allows you to use a mount. Good luck. And it's not a huge deal, but you have to go into the inventory, you have to navigate the menus, find the ring, press a button, click use, and then you're on the mount. Now, obviously, that's not how you would do it minute to minute, but the way you're supposed to do it is to take that and assign it to a hotkey on one of the 4 special quick slots. But 1, they don't tell you to do that, and 2, it's not defaulted to that, and 3, it's like in a menu deep past something else. So you have to put 2 and 2 together yourself, find the thing, and put it there. Again, not a huge deal, but like it's to the point where the core means of travel is something that they give it to you, but then don't give it to you, and you have to now go on a little mini adventure to find out how to find the thing to give you the option to be able to press a button to use the mount to get started to move around the environment. So it's like, I wouldn't mind if this was a pickup. If I walked around a corner and I found something and said, here's a thing that gives you like some interesting new feature, but it's not. There is a story beat. It's a cutscene, a literal cutscene. They know they're giving it to you. They're like making a point of giving it to you, and then, like if you exit the cutscene, you still don't have it. You have to now go through the process of assigning it, equipping it, and it's like just equip it by default onto an empty slot to start. Just give me something. Just like that's not a hard thing to do if you know it's a mandatory part of the gameplay experience.
But to not just trip on this, the game does do an incredible job with making the mount usable compared to other games with similar genres. This is kind of less noticeable because it just works as you expect. But the mount will instantly be mounted as soon as you use the item. This is not the default behavior for other games of this type, like Ghost of Tsushima or Breath of the Wild, where the mount tends to appear behind you and path towards you, and you have to wait for it so you can join in on the ride. And in some of these games, it's like entirely tedious and long, and if it gets stuck anywhere, you have to start spamming to just
It is really fluid. It makes you feel pretty badass running forward and then like pressing a button and then suddenly like you're on a horse and you're sprint. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so that's one of the best parts about it. Another thing is they actually added a dumbbell jump to the mount, which increases its usability like a millionfold, because mounts tend to be extremely clumsy and bad to use. And this double jump is straight up the best move in Elden Ring, because it lets you change your momentum almost instantly as you move. So not only are you at your fastest because you're on the mount, which is always faster than the player ever will be, and that mount can sprint, and that mount can jump higher than the player, and that mount can juggle jump. It can also change the direction.
And it can tank some attacks for you. So I think something that's kind of missing that. So we're talking about it from a like usability or from gameplay perspective. It's interesting to note that when you add a game mechanic, it can fundamentally alter the experience of the gameplay in ways that you don't think about. So, for example, probably the most core feature of a Souls-like game is the general death, bonfire, recollect your souls mechanic. That's like the core gimmick of the game. You die. There's loot. You need to go back and get it, and you go reacquire it. And now you're fighting the risk of: do I run right into the enemy to collect my loot again? Is that worth the cost? How many souls was it? When I start the next fight, I have to play it extra careful because I want to make sure I grab them before I die at least. So at least I stack the old one. There's a whole lot of interesting gameplay involved in the mentality and how you approach a scenario as a direct result of, one, the sparsity of bonfires, and two, the sprinting ability or your ability to get there and stay alive. If you add lots of extra bonfires like they have in an open world like this, and you give people a super fast sprinty thing that can double jump, turn on a dime, and take hits for you, it fundamentally alters that mechanic. Now, whether it's good or bad is up to argument. I actually like it because I think it means you're not instantly punished that you turned a corner, got hit by something big, and now you just lost whatever you had, and it's too dangerous for you to go back and get it. I think it's a good thing, but it's a fair criticism to say that mechanic now has broken the loop that was in every other game of that type, where there is no risk to go recollect your stuff. If you watch current speedruns of the game, they are literally just sprinting on the horse from collectible to collectible to collectible, fighting literally nothing, racing through the environment. And because the bonfires work, there's a lot of them in different areas, you can use the horse, do a sprint, do an air jump to stop your velocity, hugging a wall so you can jump down things you wouldn't normally be able to jump to, land on a bonfire, activate it, teleport back, and now you can fast travel and hop around the world. Again, that's not a super criticism of the game, but it is worth noting the mount being a necessity in an open world game has fundamentally altered the formula that was the original formula of a Souls game. So while the world building works well at scale, some of the mechanics of open worldness have fundamentally broken the core concept of a Souls game.
To be fair, though, because it's an open world, it's a less guided experience. And what can happen is that you can end up in an area far beyond your level more frequently than previous Souls games. It used to be a guided experience where most areas are either straight up right near the bonfire, are telling you, yeah, you are a bit too weak for this, go find another area. But in this one, it's open world, so you don't get that. And you end up with enemies that will one-shot you or two-shot you, depending on how you build your character. And if you die, it really sucks because you have to go back and take the items. This is more common in this game because everywhere that expands from the starting area is more dangerous. If you go to the right, there's Khalid, an area that's like infested with weird red blood mushrooms and whatever. And if you go to the left, you'll end up with a misty swamp, and there's a lot of mage enemies and an academy and what have you. And as you head to the north, more things that try to murder you, essentially.
And then there's God forbid you accidentally open up a chest that teleports you to a far side of the map where everything's 10 times stronger. There's totally not a bunch of those in the game.
Yeah, just totally not just one in the starting area that everybody goes to. I actually went to that intentionally, by the way, after a friend told me that happened. And I was like, this sounds awesome. And it was. This was essentially... I played the game for a few hours, and I didn't like it. I respected it. It has a lot of pretty art. I enjoyed looking at the art, so I kept playing. But I didn't enjoy my experience much. And then he told me about that chest, and I was like, I'm going there. I'm making my experience explicitly being sent off to another area of the world and finding extremely awesome items compared to the starter drab content. And I found that. I found enemies that will shoot homing bullets at me. At
those in the mine, those homing bullets are insane. That's like they just look at you and you die. Yeah.
So you can dodge them, and actually, On dodging, we talked about the mount, but the animation of dodging and of mounting and unmounting has immune frames, which ends up being the coolest combat mechanic in this game for me. Anytime there's an open world boss, I end up using the mounting for dodging instead of using an actual dodge maneuver. So
It's
there's
also
that.
just really useful. Like in previous Souls games, you'd be fighting like a dragon or something, and you'd be in long stints of just going, well, I guess I'll wait till he lands, or something will knock you away, or you'll have to leave because of large AOE attacks, and now you have to like walk back and use your stamina. Now you just hop on the horse and run in, and you've got a lot more freedom to kind of kite around a boss than you would have done in other games.
It's not only that either. The slower weapons are still relatively quick and easier to aim when you're mounted, because you're not limited by the player speed, you're limited by the mount speed. And that does not change if you're holding a greatsword or not. So there's a lot of nice game design decisions that enable competence and power fantasy in Elden Ring compared to the previous Souls games. Doesn't excuse the lack of freaking basic support with keyboard and mouse or quality of life features. You cannot pause the game even in single player, which is straight up annoying. Enemies can and will roam into safe areas. If you're in the open world in certain places and you're sitting right near the Lost Grace, the bonfire of the game, a roaming boss will still come in and kick your butt, take your souls, and say goodbye. Just for being AFK, talking to family or whatever, doing your life obligations. Not a fan of that at all. And actually, modders are risking banning themselves by modifying the game to have a pause menu. That's actually on the mods Nexus for Elden Ring right now. A pause menu mod. Just let that sink in.
Same with the FOV mod too, because the FOV is a bit ridiculously small. Could really do with a bit of an improvement. I will say one thing to note I found particularly interesting with this idea. So there's a lot of complaints about the game and performance, and I think it's worth touching on at least once. I watched a bunch of streamers play, and one of them that really was interesting was Siegel, the ex-Overwatch pro player. He was playing it, and he found something out, which I think is quite interesting. He put up the performance charts so we could see the lag spikes as he was playing, and he noticed that it's not just that the game lags, it's that it lags in particular areas. And so when you're paying attention, you realize there's certain nexus points on the map which are clearly like a culling group intersection where something's happening and it's causing a bunch of objects to flick on and off and toggle load in different regions. And one of them is the literal first area of the game, and the particular point at which it causes that stagger is smack bang in the middle of a field that you fight your first large enemy. So a lot of people will exit the opening area, walk forward, and there's a guy on a horse in front of them, and it's like, ooh, I'll fight him. He's the first big, interesting character I'm going to fight. And the specific spot he's standing on will cause a lag spike if you walk into it. Now, not around it. Like, literally, you could walk 10 steps left, 10 steps right. But that middle section where the boss is currently roaming will cause stutters and lags the whole time you're there. And obviously depends how bad your machine is, but like, we're not talking like a little bit of a judder. You'll get a bit of a judder if you're on like a 2080 or higher. If you're less than that, like your game will freeze for a second during this like middle area. But what's really weird, again, it's precisely because of whatever loading is happening at that exact intersection. So what people have to do, again, is kite him over a little bit to just like over to the side a bit and then fight him there and try to avoid fighting in that exact area. And I think it's an interesting point because a lot of people are going to play the game and within 30 minutes go, my computer can't handle this. It's lagging terribly, and I'm just out the first gate. I stood in my first open world area, and I see my first enemy, and I can't fight it because of the lag. But if they actually walk just a little bit further, you'll be fine. It's just that first area is the worst place they could have. Like, how do you not during playtesting notice one of the like biggest points of stuttering is directly the first interaction of gameplay that the players are going to have? The second part is that it loads in each new area when you land. So effectively, if you get teleported across the map or you go to another open area, it'll be a lot of stuttering while it loads. But in general, despite what a lot of the articles online will tell you, the game runs very smooth. It's just the places where it lags are specifically the places that are at the start, which is going to cause a lot of feedback from people. So if you're worried that it won't play, a lot of people are actually kind of fine. Like it's not as bad for performance as people think it is. It's just bad for a lot of other things like usability.
Yeah, so there's that, and there's also the fact that it makes the rest of the computer go to a crawl, but that's specifically what I assume to be easy anti-cheat at work. The implementation doesn't seem to be amazing. I think I read somewhere on one of the threads that was popular on the launch day or two that like 50% of the game's performance is on easy anti-cheat and like 5% is the gamepad code alone.
No, I want to, because people are bringing this up, and I want to make it very, very clear. Yes, I've watched that Digital Foundry video, and no, I am not talking about the loading that occurs when you enter regions. Yes, that does happen, but if you're in a region and you've loaded it and you're running around it continuously and you're still there, there is a particular rectangle on the map in certain areas where if you run backwards and forwards constantly, you will stutter every single time you hit that exact region of the map, regardless how long you've been in it, how long it's loaded for, how much of it's in memory. It has nothing to do with those region loads. Those region loads are there, but there is another issue, which is certain points of the map are clearly an intersection of some kind of loading group, where it's either loading out old stuff and loading in new stuff, and one of them is exact. So literally, go to the place they open. If you don't believe me, after you exit that first, you go up the elevator with that lever that we talked about, and you open the door. There's a big green field in front of you. Run straight ahead to where the guy on the horse is standing, and just run around there a little bit, and you'll see it every single time.
Yes. So, just touching a tiny bit more on the performance things. The game crashes. I don't include these things when I review a game. It's frustrating. I crashed more than 20 times in my time playing. But every big game on launch is a massive undertaking. So I respect people having a few issues. Not ideal, but also, unless they have infinite money and time, it's gonna happen.
Yeah, I feel
It's
like
new
we
tech
should
for
play on
them.
the consoles too and try it on like the environment it was kind of designed for. I feel like I should probably do that. Maybe that'll be my reason to finally get around to getting a PS5. Because the Windows version is just killing me. Oh, by the way, I popped up the giveaway thing because I just got Jason's changes integrated, and I noticed that a bunch of people were talking about chests in chat and popping up as chests as players. That was fun, so I just wanted to pop it up and let everybody know you're welcome to join the giveaway now. We'll be running it near the end of the show to give away a free copy of JetBrains Rider to whoever wins. Just pick a race in a class. You're right. Dave said you had something mentioned about hats, though. I want to talk about this threading stuff in a minute, but I'm curious what the hats was now. I've got to find out. So
You don't have to say anything. That's why I put it in chat.
Okay.
I'm literally just trying to remember how we even got to the hats part.
I can't remember. We were talking for ages about it.
So basically, the game doesn't feel very satisfying as you go around and get content, specifically as a mage. I decided that I want to deal with the spells as much as I can because I saw in one of the trailers there was the magic sword spell. Now I know it's called Carrion Slicer, and I really, really wanted to be a spellblade. So I told myself I'll go and be a spellblade, and I will put all my points in int because I'm fine with learning how to play against a boss and doing it well. 90% of the game has almost no content for me to play with, and there's a lot of things that are unexpectedly not satisfying. I go kill an entire giant boss and I get nothing out of it because he only drops two main pieces of gear, and they aren't for either one of them isn't for a mage. So like, guess I'll die.
So actually, this is an interesting side note too. I wanted to bring this up from a game design perspective. This is probably my biggest issue with the entire Souls franchise, specifically in this one. It's kind of a weirdly specific one. It's got not like whatever. The games are fine. They're pretty good. There's different people, whatever. The thing that interests me is it's the idea of a rewarding player engagement, right? Like there's the concept of intrinsic and extrinsic reward systems, and in games like Mario, you're not going to run around a corner and find a cool new ability. That's just not going to happen in a Mario game. Mario games as a structure are designed for intrinsic rewards. It is the way you feel good for having achieved finding all of the stuff and doing the thing. Nothing will ever like make you more powerful really as a character. But games, Souls-like games, for example, like it's about the loot. Let's be real. Like you're playing the game because you want to be as cool as humanly possible and get all of the badass stuff. And if you find out there's something really cool around the corner, you're not going to go, "Oh, I'll go somewhere else instead. I don't want the loot." Of course you are. You're there for the loot. That's what you're playing for, and that's fine. And I'm a big fan of games like that where you feel like you get a reward. But what's interesting about the Dark Souls formula is the loot is often in the room with the characters, not drops from the characters. So it's often like you're disincentivized from engaging with a lot of combat because the combat's going to be long, slow, and arduous. And some bosses, for example, might give you loot, but a lot of the like roaming in-world enemies, they're just guarding a room with loot in it. And so that's perfectly fine. And you can sneak around and try to collect stuff, and there's some satisfaction in that. But the problem I have is I'm the kind of person who likes to attack every challenge. Like I will happily, even though I know they respawn, I will kill every enemy on my way to my next challenge because I enjoy the like doing that process. But a game like this is fundamentally not rewarding. You're getting some reward for like killing a boss, but having like fought this thing for an hour and like dying and learning new strategies and doing all of it, you get a feeling for completing it, but then you get no drop for it. And so it feels like they're exclusively saying, "Congrats, you did it, good for you, but we don't care." And that's fine from a like universe philosophy of how the game works, but it's not very satisfying in comparison to like walking around a corner and picking something up. It's the kind of key puzzle idea, is that you need some engagement with the combination of I'm being rewarded for the effort I'm putting in, I'm being rewarded for exploring. But there's sometimes you get rewards for exploring because stuff is hidden, but often the times it's a room with a big character and a collectible. The collectible isn't hidden, the creature is clearly visible inside. There's no benefit to killing the creature unless you want to do it for experience, and the collectible is just visibly there. You didn't solve a puzzle to get it. I'm not saying there isn't other things that do that, but for that kind of general pattern is all over the game. Tons and tons of times you walk into a room, you look in and go, "I see 4 collectibles. I'm now just going to like sneak or sprint my way to collect all the stuff," and there's literally zero reason for me to engage with combat unless I'm like specifically trying to farm it. I just think from a game design perspective, that's not something. I don't like that pattern. Some people do. That's my issue with the game.
So, with respect to that, while enemies do drop the contents that make up how they exist, because most enemies are humanoids, and as you beat them, there's a low chance that you will drop equipment pieces that relate to how they look, apparently. It might be a weapon, it might be greaves, it might be a helmet, might be chest armor, whatever have you. But it's rare, and it's not very satisfying when you do get it, because you know that all the good content is either found in specific places or from defeating the bosses. And there's this quest line that I've been telling David about, which it's not precisely such a big quest, but you're being one of the main bosses in the game is in this magic academy that you, after you beat 2 story bosses, you end up with this lake area, and you find the giant academy, and it's locked, so you have to find a map that's on a corpse near one of the entrances, and then that map you have to figure out where it is on the area, and there's a freaking dragon guarding the spot that it tells you to go to, and then there's a key, and then you can enter the academy, and in the academy there's a bunch of freaking annoying things that happen, and after multiple hours of just going in and trying to figure out what can I get out of it, and where's this stupid boss, and you end up finding it, and it's made up of 2 full HP bar phases, and the second phase has a second phase. After I did all that, the only thing I got out of it that was tangible was a freaking hat.
It was a nice hat, though. It was a good hat.
It wasn't a
Come on,
nice
it was
hat.
an amazing hat. It was a hat that would stop a party. That hat was amazing.
It wasn't just a generic cloth cap.
Oh no, we're not talking cloth cap here. We're talking proper looking. You turn up to anywhere, everybody's going to be looking at you when you're wearing this hat. It's amazing. I mean, I've started fabricating one of myself. because it's a showstopper.
Wait, was that the actual hat picture, Yori?
Yeah, that was the actual hat you get, and you don't even get it. You get the option to buy it.
Oh, you
you've
never told me
unlocked
that.
the ability
You
to
never
buy
told
it?
me that. Oh, you never told me that was the
After you beat the boss, you have to go to a vendor, and the vendor will sell it for like 7,000 or 10,000, which is a significant amount of the boss's own reward. Just to buy it.
And the other thing too, right? So the kind of from a reward perspective too, right, is even if it is a good drop. Another example is there's a castle where just off to the side of the castle there's like a cool little island, and you can look down the island and go, "Oh, I'm gonna fight down there," and you fight a big beast monster guy down there, and when you're done, you get a cool sword. And this is probably like my favorite looking of all the swords in the game. It basically looks like the Iron Throne from Game of Thrones. It's a sword made of swords. It's a giant sword. It's just made of lots of little swords, and that's a really cool loot drop in other games. But the problem I have is, unlike a game where the example for me is to go back to like Devil May Cry. In Devil May Cry or God of War, when you get a new weapon, you get it, you can use it. It's worthwhile to use it. It's not going to be underpowered or weak or useless. And then you can get better at it as you go and get better at the abilities. The problem with, again, Souls-like formula is you can go through all of this stuff, and even if you get the best weapon in the game, if you're not equipped for that loadout, it is useless to you. And so even if you get something cool, you have to walk this chain of, so you go fight the boss, you have to go through all the stuff, you have to, go through the process, all the different layers, and then you get the thing. And then if you get the thing, you have to see if it happens to fit the particular loadout you're going for. If it does, then you have to go through the process of spending rewards and stuff into it to get it to the point that it's as good as anything you've already got equipped. And then if that's the case, like I watched a few people play the game, and they would unlock really cool stuff and go, "Oh, that's really nice. I like the look of this," and then put it away because the weapon they've been investing in already and like going to the blacksmith and improving far outpaces anything they've gotten later. So not only are they not rewarding you for getting loot, but even when you do get loot, the loot is going to be less useful than whatever you're already currently investing in. So the feedback loop is completely, to put it politely, arseways. It makes no sense for you. Like there's no motivation to go on an adventure, because if you find something cool, at best it's a great ornament, and it's really just frustrating.
But the hat,
except for the hats, of course.
Except for that hat.
The hat, huh? So I wanted to jump over to the threading discussion if you guys are up for it. And I think also, since our last week's giveaway winner decided they actually realized they didn't need a copy of Rider, they wanted to throw it back in the pool. I think maybe I'll run the giveaway twice. That way we can see Jason's code in action. I integrated the changes in, and it seems like it works. So we'll hit play. I had some changes too, so I wasn't 100% sure that the merge was going to work and not break, but it looks like it's going good. So maybe we'll give away a copy early and then do another one at the end of the show. But I wanted to just jump over to this threading and performance talk, because Yori had mentioned it, but also was having a chat earlier. We were talking even in the game architecture group earlier about performance and ways to optimize for mobile and stuff, and for VR. And I don't know if threading might come in handy there too. Probably not necessarily, but just the general topic of threading and performance. So I'm gonna I'm gonna pull up your eye and see what it was that he had to knock off this conversation or start it. And then if people have questions about performance or threading stuff, drop them in the chat too.
So I'd like to begin this talk from the story of how I even got to have this discussion. Terraria had to ship for SteamDeck, and SteamDeck runs on Linux, and Terraria does support Linux natively, and we've been making the experience as best as we can. So we've changed a bunch of stuff if the game runs on deck, so that it will run nicer, be a better user experience. We changed the interactability, because the deck has trackpads and they act as a mouse, but you don't have a way to nicely click on the trackpad while keeping your exact position on the screen. So we ended up having the right trigger act as a mouse click, so you can just aim with the right trackpad and then click, and it will be extremely intuitive to use the virtual mouse control in Terraria because there's inventory management and it matters. And amongst these things, one issue that cropped up was when you close the game, it freezes. Now, the game, you already said you want to close it, so nothing bad happens if you just crash the process, but it seems lacking in quality. So
it just like hangs when you close it,
Yeah,
like Terraria
indefinitely hangs.
has stopped
Yeah,
responding type thing, right?
Exactly. Yeah. If you're on Mac, it will do the circle, the rainbow circle, and if you're on Linux, straight up just stop responding. The Dex shows the Steam logo and asks you to crash it, or it will crash after a very, 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 very long time. Now, we debugged this 4 hours, and I ended up having to get some help from somebody who understands Linux better than me. But the short gist was we have objects, and some of these objects manage resources. And as part of being the nice developers we are, we want to dispose the resources we stop using. So that object has a dispose method. And as you know, any object can have a finalizer. Finalizers are when the object says, well, I'm done with my lifetime, I won't be ever used again, wrap things up. And if the object manages resources, you'll often say the finalizer calls dispose, but you're not actually manually calling it. You'll pass a disposing false by good practices. And for some unknown reason, the person who developed that class opened a monitor enter as they were managing the resources and disposing them. And the class never ended up closing the handle of that monitor enter, which means the thread kept waiting for the class to finish what it's doing, but the class never tells the thread it finishes. So when the game closes and it finalizes the entire process, the finalizer thread will hang, waiting for the class to finish finalizing eternally. And that ended up being really, 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 really difficult to find. So when we found it, obviously we fixed it, and then the entire problem went away. But for your game to close, all the finalizer thread has to finish. So something fun to talk about. And it
actually
also
close all the threads.
Yeah, and the only reason we ever found about this to begin with was because we looked at the amount of threads in the game as it closes, because we didn't know what's going on. We couldn't debug this properly. And as we did that, we saw that the game had like 32 threads. They went down to 5, and then eventually went down to 2. And we managed to figure out that like one of these was the Steam API thread, and one of them was like the FNA audio thread, and so on and so forth. Big shout out to Ethan Lee, the author of FNA, by the way. He helped a lot with figuring this out. Basically saved us. So thank you. I mean, to be fair, you don't want to ship with any sort of issue, even if it's as small as I quit the game and it hangs.
Right.
So yeah.
And then when they go try to launch it again, they run into more problems if they don't notice it's hung too. I don't know how many times I've had that with processes that I close and I've had to kill them or just dive into Task Manager and kill all the processes, or sometimes even reboot because they get so screwed up. It's rare, but it's happened.
Yeah, and on that topic, Elden Ring's easy anti-cheat will actually hang and stay there indefinitely for me until I first quit it. Apparently, I'm not the only one either. So nice. More power to it. You know what? I said I have 24 hours. So subtract like 30 minutes out of that for not figuring it out. So this threading thing ended up with me going and diving into the best practices of iDisposable and figure out in every single class in Terraria, are we using the best practices? And there's a lot of things to know that are probably not common knowledge, and I recommend everybody goes to MSDN and see that.
Dive into the iDisposable stuff. On just the general topic of threads, I haven't heard from Andrew in a second, so I want to ask him, like, with your game stuff, do you do any multi-threading at all, or do you worry about that with the games that you're working on right now? Is that something that's come up or been an issue, or are you just using like coroutines, or using any actual like split out multi-threading, or where are you at with that? Just kind of curious from like somebody who's making a game right now.
Yeah. None of that. So threading, when I first heard threading, I was thinking eyebrows. So that's where I'm at with it.
You went to eyebrows first?
Yeah,
he's got to get them done.
Not really, but it did pop in my head. But no, I have not tried anything like that yet. I think my thing right now is to work on some optimization as I go, but not focus too heavily on that and get bogged down by it quite yet. But soon enough, once the basics are done, then I would start thinking about refactoring all the basics to make them a little bit better. I suppose that would come in play then, but I'd have to do a lot of learning, I think, at that point too.
But it hasn't been something that you've had to jump into yet. And I think that's probably the case for most people working in Unity stuff specifically, that they're probably not diving too much into threading. But I'm curious, like, what about Dave and Jason? You guys do any multi-threading stuff in any of your projects for performance reasons, or just things that you need it for, or maybe just split off services that happen?
In my case, it's mostly I use it mostly as a pattern, specifically when dealing with web requests and file systems. It's just better to have things that are or another example is, I don't think a lot of people realize that when you quit your Unity game, you can still keep running code after the game is quit. And so sometimes I've been a bit cheeky with certain client projects where I don't know if I entirely trust them to close correctly. So I'll run a thread. I won't call quit by calling application quit. I'll run my own quit function, which will fire off a thread that does a completion and will then try to do a backup save and do a transactional save and then close the application. And that way, even if they like quit the app, it'll physically close and stop running, but I still have a little bit of leeway time in the background for me to just save a file and make sure everything's all in good working order. So yeah, a couple of
nice trick. Okay.
For me, it's the same sort of thing. Web requests and file systems in enterprise is for most of the threading stuff. For things like the Vixie system, which was running on the Super Bowl and stuff, that thing had to run for absolutely ages, and it had loads of web requests and all the rest, so that's all threaded.
Okay. What about you, Yuri?
In the context of Terraria, there's actually quite a bit of threading going on, less than would be ideal in a perfect world, but I do try to use it where applicable. So things Terraria uses for threading. We use lighting. When we do lights in Terraria, we're actually doing them on the CPU instead of the GPU. There are multiple reasons for this. The main one is we are not justifying it. It's just been legacy, and we're keeping the lighting style as is.
Right. And for everybody who is not familiar, Terraria is in X and A, right? The framework it's built upon. So it's part of it too. You didn't just decide to go take some engine and switch it back to use CPU. Yeah.
So XNA doesn't actually do any special rendering things for you. It expects you to send calls to GPU and do all that, and it has like sprite patches that you can say, draw sprite. This is the texture 2D, and this is the rectangle where you're supposed to draw it, and here is a color multiplier, and it will pass that to the shader, and the shader has to do everything the shader does. But when you're dealing with rolled lighting, most people would expect that it goes on the GPU. In Terraria, what actually happens is we have a CPU thread that has per block the amount of light it has, and then we have threads that do a pass on lighting and like smear it with degradation of the light values over time, over per block to be precise. And this degradation changes depending on, say, buffs in the game or whatever have you. And then we use that lighting color we got with all the blocks with all the block rendering in the game on the CPU end. We're asking what light amount is this block? Draw that block with that light amount. Now, one thing we get out of that is that when we draw a sprite, we can tell it which positions in the world to sample for lighting based on the CPU. Or if we make an effect, we can make it appear depending on how bright or dark the area is. And it can leave its area, of course, depending on that. There are some advantages for it. There are some things that definitely don't justify it. But it's how we pick to use Terraria, and it's not going to get changed right now.
So do you mostly thread out things like that are rendering stuff, or is there any like game logic stuff that's threaded as well?
So there used to be the game's networking used to be put on another thread. So as you get messages, you process them and you let them run in.
That's very common, by the way, for people not familiar with network stuff. Like you usually are going to want to read that on some other thread.
Yeah, so to put it for people to understand a bit easier, if you've never experienced this, networking is just a matter of sending bytes from point A to B and getting them in, and then when they're ready, consume them in some specific way. And let's say somebody wants to send, I have 5 health. So you send the 1 byte that says 5 to the other person. The other person has to say, am I getting any messages? Okay, I got a message. I got a number 5. It's supposed to be health, so I'm going to set health to 5. And that doesn't need to because you're not always getting messages every single frame. There's no point in there really being a dedicated check every frame for it. So you can just run a thread that waits out to get anything and then use that.
It also works the other way too, by the way. It's worth noting. It works with saturation of messages as well. Think of it as the example of your email inbox. You're not sitting there staring at it real time, wasting your time tracking every new email that comes in and responding to it. But at the same time, you might not be at your email when a mail comes in. And so when you're doing it the way we're describing it, you can have the equivalent of a queue that will take incoming requests from something like a web service or whatever, and you don't have to deal with it at the time. You basically can stack up your requests and then process them as you've got bandwidth to do so. Because in my case, it's files. Like if you're doing what's called an ingest system, where you're taking like all of the data from a certain provider or website or company, and you're reading in thousands of transactions per second off their service, you don't have time to do what you're trying to do, which is parse it, strip it, take out the useful data, save it in one database, save some of it in another database, take the remaining file, change its format to JSON, store it in a Azure table blob or something. All of that's not going to happen in the milliseconds you're taking all the data. So what you do is you backlog out all of the stuff and you put it into an intermediary queue or something, and then you process them as and when the resources are free. So it's not just a bit, it works both sides.
Yeah, so good design will dictate that as you get messages, and if they're big, you might be getting them in pieces, by the way. So you might get like, this message is supposed to be a length of 100 bytes, and you only got 63. So you're waiting until you get like 9 more, 10 more, etc., etc. And once you have 100, you're ready to read the message. And only then, actually go ahead and read it. And you might want to change the game state. Now, this used to all happen in another thread in Terraria. And we ended up having very weird issues where enemies that you fight that would spawn other enemies would start changing, would start processing where to spawn these new enemies halfway in with your client. And it got a bit crazy. But the case in point, is some bosses would say you bit a blue slime when you kill them, instead of the boss's name, because the boss would override. The blue slime would spawn on the NPC slot that got cleared by the boss on the one frame, that even middle frame of what you're trying to do. It got really crazy. And the reason that happened was because we didn't have a dedicated point in the main thread for processing the messages that were ready. So we moved to having that. But as it were to be, Terraria technically supports up to 255 players, even though we don't ever design for it. And some people want to have big servers, and they used to rely on the code being run entirely on another thread. And when we moved the processing of the messages to the main thread, it actually got slower for that specific type of server that has a lot of players. So they asked us to add customization where a server can ask to run its messages in that other thread. And we have it. So
is that a command line argument?
No.
No.
It's when you join a server, it can send you a packet that says, hey, can you please, from now on, process messages using that other thread? And it's like, yep, sure, okay, until I disconnect from the server. This is how I do things.
Oh, okay. By the way, we're 1 like away from me starting the giveaway and everybody seeing Jason Story's new visuals and new health bar that I saw in there.
I do make it very clear, though.
Somebody unliked.
I do make it clear. I only put in just like to get the stuff in. I'm going to go like I'm taking no ownership of the style of the UI. From a UI perspective, it's not done. This is all I did was put in a health bar. So don't.
You're basically the
Baseman's
visual
concerned about his
designer.
lost grace.
That's why we call you the
many
technical art lead.
caveats. So many caveats.
When I get time, I want to do an actual pass, so it's not neon colors and multiple sizes and different fonts things. And then it'll be.
Yeah.
Then I'll take credit for it. The only thing I'm taking credit for is the fact that it animates the health bar. That's about it. And the
Not
messages in the
neon.
bottom left are mine as well.
Interesting. Well, the fight's going now, so we'll watch and see who wins the first copy. Looks like there's a lot of wizards. Interesting. I don't remember a wizard winning last time, but maybe that was the case.
I'm being so disturbed by the health bar depleting to the right.
Oh yeah. I just realized they're going to the right. That's the way it's supposed to be, right, Jason? That's the way health bars go.
I matched whichever way yours was in your system. Like I said, all I did was I put in a piece of code and press the button. So whatever was there is still there.
All I did was merge. I'm not sure. I guess we'll see.
All right, where's the
It's working
executive
either
producer
way.
and the designer? We need to have a talk.
We'll blame Salim. He's an official game designer.
Oh yeah, there you go. It's
He can get the blame for us. This is just the implementation of his design, I'm sure. Right, Salim? Maybe that'll get him to hop in the chat. Oh. All right. Well, the battle is running, although it doesn't fit perfectly on my resolution here.
So just talking about threading, whoever wants to ever use it, Unity actually makes it very easy with its job system, but you have to understand how as you modify a certain piece of content, you should not allow another piece to tamper with it, because what you usually end up doing is you get the piece of content, you run some calculations, and then you set it back to some other state. And if two threads try to say, well, I got the piece of content at the same time, they both know what state they're working with, but it's unchanged. They both change to something else, and then they set it back, but they might set up, override each other. And this is something that's far from ideal and very difficult to find if you don't sequence your code in a way that prevents this from happening. So one solution for this is to obviously know what you're doing. Very hard to maintain. The other is by using locks, which say, I am touching this piece of content. Nothing else is allowed to touch this piece of content. No other thread until I release my lock. And that lock has to be an object, something present in memory that says, I am in use right now. So I recommend that you try to get into threading with Unity. Relatively easy. Do read up about it. This is the most common problem that you face.
How do you guys feel about locks in general? My experience has always been that usually there's a better way around it, and that they're kind of like fixing an issue. Sometimes I've had cases where there's a resource that just has to be locked, but most of the time when it's my own stuff, I found that like it leads to just more problems later. But I'm curious, what about you guys? No?
Okay, so I personally dislike using locks, but that said, it feels like a necessary evil at times. The one problem I have with it is that you're kind of losing the entire benefit of threading if you end up needing to have the lock being used. So make of that what you will. It is a good signifier of, hey, something is busy, don't touch, which, of course, is the original intent of it. So if I really, 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 really need it, it will be used.
I will say something interesting about the whole threading conversation is something that's kind of unintuitive at first is there's people talk about performance, and there's there's scenarios like file access. I always go back to that one because it's kind of a good intersection of a number of complicated topics. There's certain ways to read from a file and like process the lines in it that have certain performance characteristics. Then there's more efficient ways to do it. But what's funny is you can use a slower method of doing something, but then do it in a thread, and then your net result will be faster because you're doing it in parallel rather than the actions of having to do it with a locked thread. So it doesn't seem intuitive at first, but sometimes it's actually very interesting that you could take code that's like really optimized, but you're still leaving performance on the floor, because what you could be doing is you could be doing a far slower version of that, but doing it in a solution that isn't going to block whatever process you're trying to do. So that was very interesting to me when I remember seeing a speed test comparison of 3 or 4 different solutions to solving reading the same file, and it is kind of interesting how what seems intuitive might not always be the right answer.
Yeah, and to expand on what Jason just said, the reason that waiting on something, which by the nature of it adds latency, would be faster is that you're not being blocked from doing something else as you wait. This is why threading is usually used in the first place. You put a task in parallel, but it doesn't block other tasks from happening. And certain tasks are blocked by waiting for something beyond your control. You're saying, I need this file, but I will have to wait anyways. While I'm waiting, let me do something else. For example, a file system might not immediately give you access to the file. So asking for it, waiting to get the file, is a cost you're going to have to pay either way. But the main thread shouldn't be locked out of doing something as you do it. So you could run a calculation, you could process a previous file that you already got, you could do many other things.
Yeah, plus the other thing too that can kind of really trip people up is you may be thinking you're doing the right thing and using threads, but here's a fun thing. A common example for using threading is collating and transforming data sets from multiple different sources. So say you were doing a stock market exchange application and you were trying to calculate the current state of various exchanges. You would be pulling down some web data relevant to the current state, and you would then be aggregating it, checking the means and averages and calculating it. But what's going to happen is, even though you're threading it, you might be awaiting one or the other. And so there's certain thread tasks you can do, which are await all or await one or whatever. And you effectively get into the point where even if you're doing something fast, you're bottlenecked by if something needs to be aggregated by whatever the slowest of the 3 things are anyway. So there's interesting scenarios where even then, maybe you're better off not threading some things, because if you thread those, you're now waiting on the slowest operation of the 3 threads. So this gets into some very weird territory in some of the edge cases of the stuff.
In the question here with debugging, you can actually always just turn it off from being a thread and just deal with the slowness in the editor and see the debugging there.
Yeah, you can also introduce artificial. Yeah, go ahead.
You can run it as different awaiters. You can get the result in line. Another interesting thing though, specifically with Unity, by the way, if you're using threads, Unity has a catch-all exception handler that will catch threads that throw exceptions separately from the normal way that you would basically. Long story short, in a normal C# application, it's considered very bad practice to do a void that's an async function, because you don't have a handle with which to work with what you're doing. But for a number of very interesting Unity-specific reasons and the way it will bubble up and execute its exceptions, it's actually pretty good to use async void in Unity, because you'll still be able to catch exceptions. One of the biggest issues with exception handling when it comes to threads is if you do your try-catch block, the exception will be thrown in a different thread and you can't see it. You end up getting into this really weird territory where you end up having to have a parent object that captures those exceptions. A trick that you can do, depending on the environment you're in, is you don't throw the exceptions at all. You catch the exceptions, you store the message, and you return a queue that builds up over time full of messages of errors. And then you can fire a cancellation token, and when you're done, read the array of exceptions that failed. So say, for example, you're running 1,000 files. You don't want the whole thing to fall over because an exception was thrown in certain cases. You might want to run all of the available files, but if one file fails, you don't want to fail. You want to store the exception in something and continue running the process thread for the whole lot. And then when you're done, check your lookup effectively of what failed when and how. So yeah, that's another option.
Yeah, and for those who want to dive a bit deeper with Unity and asynchronous things. There you go. There's that, and
Yeah, there's a link in the chat, and I'll link that in the description. That was for best practices, async versus coroutines on Unity, right?
yeah, from Unity Copenhagen. So
Yeah.
there was that. I think it touched on the threading at some point there, like cleanly explaining how the caveats and what you're doing. Also, to the other person asking how many threads you need to use, Unity actually has a specific field for it in the job utility class called job worker maximum count, which will tell you how many workers you're actually allowed to use. And you can actually specify each job in Unity use less than this amount, specifically if you know that you want to reserve a thread for something else. So very easy to decide the amount of threads you use. Generally speaking, you just want to use the amount of threads you have minus like 1.
Something else just occurred. I don't know if it's covered in that article, but it's one of my favorite gotchas when you're talking about threading in this scenario, especially in Unity. By default, the presumption is that you're running a thread with an expectation to do something with the resulting data set, which means oftentimes you send something off to do something, and when you're done, it will marshal back to the main thread. So it's effectively like, go off and get me something, bring it back, give it back to me in the main thread, I can then use it. So by default, there is an option called configure a waiter, and that basically says, do you await on completion to marshal it back to the main thread, which you might want to do, but in a lot of cases, specifically with stuff that you're doing in Unity, you might just be firing something off and you don't actually need it to come back to and halt the main thread. So there's an option when you make an asynchronous task to say configure a waiter and set it to false, because by default it's true. So just keep in mind, if you're making threads and they're not, or making tasks rather, specific for being specific, you don't want them to marshal back to the main thread. So have a look at the configure a waiter option.
And on the point of tasks, in Terraria, one of the tasks we actually have is creating and loading worlds. Very big task, because Terraria worlds can go upwards to 20 million blocks. And that goes through multiple passes, as we say, add dirt, add oceans, add underworld, add a giant pyramid, a dungeon, whatever have you. And this process takes time. We can't just freeze the application for an entire 2 to 3 to 8 minutes. And one of the build versions early on for consoles used to take 30. So we can't do that synchronously. We kick this off to a thread, and we expect a callback of saying, hey, you finished making a world. And one of the funnier things that ended up happening is, as you make the world, it changes it changes the backgrounds that would appear in specific areas in the game for that world. But the main menu used these, and because it ran in another thread, it would run as the game is drawing. So at one moment, the game would say, which texture am I supposed to load? You're loading texture 2. Okay, load texture 2, and afterwards use it. But as it loaded texture 2, the texture changed to 3. And the game would then error on us in the draw call as we're making the world, saying, hey, you're actually trying to draw a texture that's not loaded. So that was a thing that happened. And what I wanted to say was, to get a callback from a thread, there are multiple ways to do this. So I suggest looking it up. In Terraria, we just literally give an action to go back to the main, to call in the main thread from the other thread. So that works nicely for us. But there are also tokens for completion and tokens for cancellation, which I guess is also worth talking about. How do you guys feel about tokens being used?
90% of my tasks will have a cancellation token.
Yeah.
It's very easy to set up. You should have it. Even if you don't think you'll need it, it's good to have it there because it's useful to be able to have control from a caller. There's so many scenarios where you might want to cancel early. Something broke, the app's about to close. To presume that you don't need to shut down a running task is cause of a lot of issues.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I always want to have the cancellation one. Before we continue on, though, I want to see who wins this the last round of our first giveaway, if you guys are good with it. We got a wizard versus an assassin. Studio Avda and Infinite's World. Let's see who the final winner is, and then maybe we'll do a quick change to this health bar too, and run a second giveaway. So it looks like Infinite's World, the assassin, has won. So shoot me an email, and you get the first copy of Rider, and then we'll do another giveaway in just a few minutes. Maybe when we hit to 200 likes, we'll start the second giveaway.
I just want to say
give people time
that
to join.
I figured out why the health bar goes to the right. It's because Jason rigged things so that the chest with its snappy attack will actually make the health bar go in a juicy way to that side, pushing it away.
Should have picked chest myself. I feel like should have won. That's the difference. I have to put that extra code in for myself.
The what? The just checks to see your name. Yep.
Yeah.
Gives you some extra attack chance. That's
so far I haven't looked at the battling portion of this. So the beauty of a decoupled system is all I did was interact with the event system that was already set up by these guys. So I could modify the way it's rendering without having to actually look at the system at all. So I haven't even dived into the battling system yet. I might have some thoughts once I do, but I haven't yet. So it's entirely self-contained.
And he's gone to go and fix the game.
Yeah,
he's so desperate to get those health bars the other way around. He's left the chat to go do. That's his dedication for you.
So Milodev is actually asking an interesting question here. We can cover time with. Hello, what do you consider is the future of Unity? I've seen a lot of complaints of their recent decisions and basically ignoring developer needs, but I've also heard praise. Is it worth learning?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Unless you're becoming a mechanic, then maybe go and learn car mechanics or something like that. Or
that was weird. Yeah. I don't know what happened. The computer started beeping, and I got kicked out of everything. Luckily, Restream fixed it all.
Yeah, if you're getting into game to follow on for that, if you're getting into game dev, Unity's not a bad place to go. Lots of games get built with Unity, so.
It doesn't seem
honestly
or bad
for it.
It's not going away. Unity's not going away.
No.
I think a lot of us have issues with Unity one way or another, but I think, quite frankly, they're the kind of things that you earn your ability to complain about Unity when you've been using it long enough as we have, and it's literally your living. Like, you're making money from what Unity does or doesn't decide to put its time and effort into. If the question becomes, is it worth learning? The answer is always going to be yes. And if I was to say, what game engine should you learn? I think it's the best one to learn on, because Unreal is going to give you shiny stuff, and it'll be great if you're trying to get into an industry that uses Unreal as their engine. But Unity is, I think, a better example of something where there's a lot of tools to help you out for stuff you can't do, but you have to learn how to use the damn thing. Like, you could use Game Maker, but you'll learn how to make a game, but you won't learn how to make a game. And I think Unity, unfortunately, for good or bad, gives you just enough to be dangerous, but not enough to really hold your hand, which means you will have to actually go in and learn some programming and some various things. So I think if the answer is, should I learn it? Well, yeah, I think it's legitimately the best engine to learn, in the same way that I think Java is the best programming language to learn. I hate Java, but I think it's the best programming language to learn, because I think it's the perfect combination of it does some stuff for you, but not everything, and touches on all of the concepts you would need to learn. And similarly is how I feel about Unity.
Just to correct a bit of your statement, Unity, the Game Maker will teach you how to make a game, but not what makes the game. And this is what Unity actually covers for you. It's that Unity lets you interact with all the actual processing and the important back end of what you want out of what makes the game. If you want trail rendering in specific ways, if you want loading a bunch of map portions and all that, Unity has the tools for it, but you have to learn how to use them and what goes into the game that you play in order to get all these features happening. Yeah, game makers are just sets of features that come in a certain way bundled together for you to consume, but you can't do a much beyond them. Go ahead.
Also, I wanted to add, if you're already proficient in a particular language, that might dictate which way you go. Because, I mean, there's Godot out there, and lots of people obviously are mentioning Unreal and Unity and the rest. if you're proficient in the language that engine goes into, and you just want to start getting into building video games, that might lead you that sort of way. I mean, we all use Unity. Unity is very easy to use, but Godot is not too bad either, for instance.
Yeah, I because that particular question or a variant of it comes up a lot, and I cannot stress this enough. Like, there is nothing else in your life where you think like this, where you go, which if you're building a house, you don't base your house based on what wallpaper you're going to put on it, right? Like, it's nonsense. Like, your engine is a tool to get you to make a thing. The answer is, which one do I pick? Well, the one that helps me make the thing. It's not a fashion show. It's like the engine is the engine that helps you get there. I wouldn't worry about like which one's popular, which one's rising, what does this. Ask yourself, what skills do I have? What tools does it do? What platform does it launch on? What am I trying to achieve? Is there examples of what I'm trying to achieve done in the engine or tool that I'm looking at? And then pick the one that fits the thing you're doing. Like, it's not a matter of which one do I like more. Like, I don't.
And if you're not proficient yet in anything like specific languages or even game design or programming at all, look at the education materials. Which one will help you get there faster, and then go with that one. I would think that would be Unity, probably, because it has a much bigger community, much more history of learning material, much more people making YouTube videos and stuff. So yeah.
I would honestly say, I think no matter, even which you land on a different engine, my recommendation every time is make your first game in Unity. Whatever it is, some little sample game, make your first kind of game that you actually want to do something with in Unity. Then you can go try other stuff, but it's probably the best way to get you started.
Yeah. I mean, I sit in a Godot group every now and again with a few friends that are very proficient in that and use that to build video games a lot. And sometimes when you go and sit in that group, if the question comes up there sometimes, well, what game engine should I use? And they all turn around and go, well, you should use Godot. It's got a big community. It's got easy to learn. It's got great tutorials. It runs with Java, then Godot script and all the rest. So some people say other things, but Jason's story is right. I mean, do what comes easiest to you and look at what you're trying to build to put it out there.
Yeah.
Or just start with XNA, because XNA is awesome.
It's probably not a good place to start anymore.
Yeah,
you can't.
You can't even install it anymore. And actually, on that note,
I knew this would get
this is a very interesting and very frustrating one. So on Thursday, which is the last day of my work week, I worked on my tasks, and right before the finish of the day, I got asked to put out a beta build of the update we're currently working on, so that beta testers can try things out and tell us how they're going. And as I just closed everything down and said, okay, yeah, just run the build script that will build the game for 3 different platforms, again, using XNA and FNA, I get greeted with a very interesting message that the content builder for XNA does not work, is not recognized, is not supported by MSBuild. And I thought back to what I did that day, and I installed Visual Studio 22. And basically, it does not support .NET 4 for that project anymore. And I ended up extremely panicked because I didn't have the time for this. I had some other applications after I finished working, and I'm like, what do I do? And I started going in and trying to. So XNA is for Visual Studio 2010, and it doesn't have an installation for versions beyond that. If you wanted 2013, you can't. 2015, you can't. 2017, you can't. 2019, you can't. But the community has made a different version or figuring it out how to install it. And it basically boils down to get a folder of things that you had to install XNA to get, drop it in the one of the MSBuild folders, and then run the developer console for Visual Studio and run some gucutil commands to register some modules that XNA needs in order to let you use MSBuild to build XNA. And those don't work in Visual Studio 2022. So I guess it got extremely screwed there. I tried uninstalling it, installing in 2019, and reinstalling that part, praying it works. It didn't. It gave me another error. I didn't know what to do. That error had absolutely no results in Google. It made absolutely no sense. It said that it couldn't find something that is clearly there and is registered and shows up there.
Well, it's lucky Visual Studio is such a quick install.
Yeah, relatively. I'm
No, I'm
glad
joking. It's a terrible.
No, that is most
Yeah,
definitely a joke.
Yeah.
My God.
It
The only thing
takes
worse
forever.
is the Android tools and going down the ADB route, or setting up a brand new Node project. Those two things you basically just leave for the day. But other than those two, Visual Studio is a nightmare.
Okay, sure, fine, fair enough. To be fair, the installation process is relatively simple. You just click a few buttons and wait. Or rather, go ahead and panic and go to the bathroom and do whatever else you have to do while
Go
it's
get a meal.
doing its thing. Yeah, so on that note, I wanted to find 2019's installer, but the page directs you to 2022, so that was its own fiasco, and I'm glad I never delete installers for things that I get.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I still have some old installers of all the Visual Studio versions. I think back to like 2005 on a drive. I have a folder of installers that I copy from drive to drive as they die.
yeah,
Now
I
I
kept
feel
some for a
justified,
while.
even though I'll never use them still.
I kept them for a while back when I was still using Ncrunch, and I wanted to have the old support for Ncrunch on stuff, but I eventually gave up. Once you convinced me to switch to Rider, it's like, I don't even want Visual Studio on my computer anymore. Get that trash out of here.
Yori, real quick, did they remove them from the MSDN downloads though too, or can you still log in on an MSDN account? Have you tried that?
I don't know if they removed versions above 2010. 2010, I don't think you'll ever find anymore. And we do have the installers for it on our Relogic drives. On that note, XNA's installer apparently requires some download from the net. I mean, specifically, as you use the installer, it tries to download something, and the server that serves that thing it tries to download is no longer up, and the installer will fail. So you literally cannot legitimately install XNA anymore at all.
I hope you have images of like drives
Yeah,
ready to go to be able to go back.
So
and...
I have an entire backup of the entire folder of everything that XNA ever installed, and in addition to that, I unpacked the original installers, and I got all the components except for the one that fails, and apparently it's not necessary. It's just the Windows for Games for Windows Live portion that fails, and it's not necessary. So there's that, and I know what commands are necessary to run in order to make the MS build work with it, and it's all documented, and backups exist in multiple drives and on other people's PC, so we are safe on that. But damn, supporting Terraria is a mess.
You're giving me flashbacks to other
end of life. Go ahead, Jason.
You're giving me flashbacks to the nightmare of when you're talking about installing things and Microsoft. One of the most harrowing memories I've ever had was I used to do a lot of computer repairs when I was younger, and there's nothing more frustrating than trying to fix a broken computer. So you reinstall Windows only to realize you've now reinstalled it and don't have drivers for your network. So now, because you don't have drivers, you can't get online to get the drivers that you need to get online to get the drivers that you need to get online, at which case you're now screwed. And so you're like in the process of trying to fix your operating system. You're sitting there and go, great, I now need to wait until I can go somewhere else to someone else's house to use their computer to download the drivers to continue the process of reinstalling Windows. Oh, good times.
Drive over there and have them burn you a CD or put it onto a floppy disk if you're old enough.
I mean,
when it got to Windows 7,
yeah, go ahead.
I was saying when it got to Windows 7 and you could put the USB stick on the whole OS on a USB stick, night and day. I could go to people's houses, pop in a USB stick, just install it normally. So good.
It's definitely a lot better. I have a Windows 10 and it's about to be 11 on every thumbstick in my house pretty much. I default set them up as an install drive, and then I put a folder on there to put the actual stuff I care about. So if I ever need to reinstall Windows, I just find a thumb drive laying around my house and pop it in to whichever kid broke their computer or my own.
And I mean, on Windows 10, they actually expect you to log into an online account as you install it. So,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, for better or worse. Also, to the person mentioning that maybe we should port Terraria to monogame, I've looked
Port
into
it?
it.
Yeah, that's
I've looked
probably
into
not
it.
worth
There, yeah, and to put it on the spotlight, Stardew Valley recently upgraded to monogame, and the process, in short, requires very little changes, but you are updating the minimum requirements of the game, which means some players running on whatever older setup they have might not be able to play anymore, and new issues might pop up. And we're trying to finish Terraria. We're trying to move to a next game. Whatever that next game is, we're trying to move forward. So introducing
Sure.
new issues that we'll have to support for a long term.
It's the time when you want to
I'm
switch
doing
engines. You need to upgrade, switch engines, and start adding support for new platforms.
Just
Just
move
do
it to
it quickly,
Unity. Just move it to Unity. Come on.
Yeah, just switch builds. Yeah, just copy your code over. It's all C# anyway, right? X and A.
Yeah.
You just copy your code over to Unity, paste it in, and then grab
If
some.
you've extracted enough, it should be really easy, shouldn't it?
I don't know. You tell me. On that note, even I don't know what the last update is. Every time we get told it's the last update, we then get told we were lied to. So,
oh,
It is good that you're the exception to the rule, because the amount of times I try to explain to people the difference between enterprise software and games, and the easiest example is, on average, a game is made, written once, and delivered, and it's not going continuous upgrades and various different extra additions. That's usually what happens in a game engine or like the core. And so it's good that Terraria is there to disprove the one thing that I use as my consistent rule to describe the difference between games and software.
I mean, use MapleStory. They have twice the length of the game. And they're still in 32-bit. They're literally mentioned they moving to 64-bit after 19 years.
19 years is so long to work on a game or have a game around. Then again, I guess all the MMOs are that old too. It just feels weird just saying it, hearing the numbers out loud.
Yeah, as a contractor, 4 years is the longest I've ever worked on only one single project. So to me, that's insane.
Yeah, it's about the same for me.
And on that note, another very interesting game to look up regarding long-term support is League of Legends, because they have a very unique problem where their launcher gets remade like every few years, because people keep telling them that the launcher sucks, and the launcher apparently has to use a lot of web features. And they have a great Riot blog post about it that I recommend everybody go take a look into. They also talk about the game and replication of things and determinism, and explaining all that fabulously.
Is that you said a YouTube talk or a blog post?
It's a blog post from Riot, the company that works on League of Legends.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. If you have a link for that, I'm gonna share that and read that myself. Kind of curious. I've always wondered about like their launcher process. I remember when they first switched to their like second launcher, or at least the second one after the beta, and I was already kind of hating it. But like their whole launcher system seems like it's been like a big giant project and it's constantly changing. And it's weird how it's so separate too. And I guess like reminded me that you have to, some companies you end up having to do that, but they had that launcher long before they had even a second game, right? Like they had the launcher, and I think 8 years later or 7 years later they finally made a second game that was on that launcher. So it was it's definitely something I want to check out and read about, because it's been something I've been curious about the whole time. I was also a giant League of Legends addict. I think you can't see it up there, but I got my original like League of Legends CD that I bought from Target when you could buy the game in stores back in the early beta days. So it was, I love that game. It was a lot of fun. I suck at it now. It's been too long, so I can't play anymore. But
League of Legends in general is just a massive achievement in creating spaghetti.
It's just it's fun stuff. It was well done, I thought, and really weird how like just watching the the progress of that whole thing. I just shared the link for it in chat. Also, anybody who's still with us in chat, if you want to enter the giveaway or getting close to the last chance, I'll probably kick it off in a few minutes, either when we get to 100 people or 200 likes or the next 8 minutes or so. So make sure you join if you wanted to win a copy of JetBrains Rider.
And just to clarify, I do love League of Legends. I played it a lot ever since season 3 all the way to, well, concurrently. I do follow it very tightly, and I look up all the bugs they have because it's incredibly fun to me to imagine how these bugs happen and trying to guess like, this is how the engine does these things, and trying things out in game to figure out if I can figure out how to replicate specific things that look a bit off. The game has so many features. I feel sorry for the devs to support all of this. I'm glad they cover how they test things, and they have game simulations. They have code that runs a test by literally booting up a game service, teleporting a character into a specific position, teleporting another character to a specific position, casting a skill, whatever, in an automated way, and reporting the results. And it's really interesting. It's on the blog post. Recommend reading it. But yeah, there you have so much content interactions to test.
Yeah, I definitely would not envy them like that. It seems like a nightmare. It probably started off fun and simple, but I can imagine after you add a couple hundred champs and every other one or every third one has some new code functionality that it needs to support, it gets messy quick.
Especially if it's an esport and the community are like vultures. If you have a single ability that's OP, you get into those interesting scenarios, like somebody hucking somebody with an ability, stepping through a teleporter, teleporting back to their own base and pulling a character halfway across the map into turrets. Like, people will find these things and they will abuse them, even in tournaments. So yeah, that stuff starts to get particularly important.
Yeah. All right, everybody stay silent for a second. Okay, I have no. Andrew, you got anything to add there?
No.
Okay, so going back to actually last week where you talked with Salim, there was a lot of talk about game balance and understanding how long to beat a boss or how a boss HP scales. And I actually had some things I wanted to say about that there. So, Andrew, do you want to cover what happened last week just so people understand the topic?
It was about scaling, both leveling scale, so essentially scaling both the players' level / skills / power, whatever you want to call it, and the bad guys equal level skills, whether you have them all be static, whether you have them scale with the character, and then
the eternal struggle of dynamic scaling. Yeah, some people love it, some people hate it.
That's right. Dynamic scaling versus static scaling, and even with static scaling, how do you set up that? How do you determine what the scale should be, etc.
And you were talking about how for yours you do it based on number of hits, right, for combat?
Yeah, that's what my goal was. I wanted to figure, okay, there's an average number of hits. At the beginning, maybe it takes 2-3 hits to kill a bad guy. At the end, maybe it takes 7 or 8 hits or 9 hits or 10 hits. And then just do the math of potential max damage, potential minimum damage, the average, multiply, divide, all that.
Crazy math, right?
Crazy elementary
multiplying and dividing.
I know, at the same time.
Yeah, so on that note, and also there was another topic you talked about, which was the amount of players being involved in said calculation. And somebody specifically asked you how to make a boss be more difficult in relation to the amount of players. There's a lot I want to unpack here, but I recommend a new approach, which is do it as a function of time, because an amount of hits doesn't necessarily scale properly with time, depending on what you're fighting and how many windows of opportunity that thing gives you to even hit it. You could say a boss takes 1 hit to beat, but you can't make that 1 hit at the start, and it might take a whole 30 seconds as the boss spawns. A good example of that recently is Genshin Impact, which has very long summon animations for bosses, where they are essentially unkillable until they finish doing their whole entrance animation. They might also have mid-fight attacks where they become invulnerable or go off the map to do some amazing thing and you can't hit them. So even if the fight takes 5 hits, after 3 hits you're actually stuck and waiting. And fights, as you build them, might end up going with a tandem that you don't want the fight to last too long because the player gets tired as long as you're telling them you're in a tension zone, you're not allowed to rest and recover from it. So even if a fight can be extremely long, it doesn't necessarily mean the player will be able to last and managing their efficiency properly in an extremely long fashion. Which is why, going back to Elden Ring, bosses in Dark Souls games actually promote being offensive. Players who are careful will die more than players who are more offensive because the players get mentally stressed out. They stop using their weapons properly. They run out of limited resources that they have access to, and they give the boss more opportunities to hit them. It's a whole fiasco, but the point is the amount of time the player can act and the resources the player has and the amount of time the boss is open syncing up to the amount of time the player has to act are what makes any fight happen. You could put any numbers on it. You could put whatever amount of hits you want in there. You can put whatever damage scaling you want in there, but the amount of time is what you're actually tracking in the end of the day. Time that the player has to act and the time the player has until they die. And on that note, multiplayer. Multiplayer has a very interesting issue, which people who are saying just give it more a boss more health to deal with more players, don't. The solution doesn't exactly address that, which is a boss usually has attacks that focus on an area that covers one player. The boss has a melee body, it has 2 giant axes, but these axes only have 1 meter of reach. They will not reach all the players on the map. So, the second player might have way more lenience to act. Their amount of time available to interact with the boss goes way more up way more than the player who is actually targeted. Which is why, if you can, try to alternate what attacks hit what player. And if the boss has attacks that are ranged, try to make them aim at different players as they should. If the attacks are self-homing or if the boss spawns ads, try to spawn more ads to keep all the players busy at all times. This will make the fight way more manageable and make sure that it works well in multiplayer from an intentful position. You don't have to make explicit new attacks for the boss. You just have to make sure that every player has something to do. Just something to do.
Another thing which I think is really interesting about what you're saying, the first half of that, when you're talking about the how you're engaging with the boss, a similar part of that is when you talk about fatigue for a player. There's a common game design issue I see with this, where you have bosses with multiple phases, and all of the phases are literally the same thing, just with a different shaped or colored weapon or sword or whatever. The point of multiple phases is to tackle this fatigue. People have a certain level of engagement in what they're doing, and there's that level of sort of energy you have. If you're doing a multi-phase boss, it should fundamentally force you to recontextualize what you're doing as it changes phases. If it's guy with big sword, now he switches to big axe, it just might as well not be another phase. It's just health bar regenerating, and it'll be exhausting, and the process and strategy is the same. The moveset should change with each changing phase state, because now, preferably as well, depending on your game, it can be particularly engaging to go from, and you'll see a lot of big bosses do this, they'll like fight you on the ground, they'll fly into the air, they'll do projectile-based combat, and then they'll come back. They're not only switching up their abilities, they're switching up the way in which you have to engage with the combat, either close range or long range, certain elemental attacks versus other elemental attacks, switching whatever defensive stance they're using. There's something that fundamentally asks you to recontextualize the scenario you're in and how you engage with the combat. So if you're going to multi-phase a boss, don't just have bullet sponge and then bullet sponge with a different sponge color. That doesn't mean anything. This might as well not do that at all,
Yeah, perfectly spoken. And on the note of that, if the boss makes you do something different, it's also a good design idea to try and make sure that the player is exposed to it early on in a rather safe way. Bosses will sometimes do this by intentionally missing one attack at the start of a fight, and in games like Uncharted, they will specifically always miss the first shot that they shoot at you. This both tells you the position of the enemy and tells you that you're in danger, so you can react to it. So that's something to watch out. And in Dark Souls specifically, the Elden Ring, a lot of the bosses will start with a ranged attack that they will do extremely quickly, but you always dodge it the same way. It's something I found pretty interesting.
There is actually interesting on that. There's one problem with the way they approach that, which is, so this is more like a broader philosophy of big bosses. There is a bit of an issue with boss design in games where the large bosses are becoming just mob scaled up. Now, there's a bit of that in Elden Ring, if I'm being honest. There's a lot of characters you fight where their speed and maneuverability is just the same as a smaller mob, only they're just bigger. They roll around a lot and they attack you fast. And my argument with that isn't about a gameplay perspective per se. It's more the fact that if you do that, one, it looks off. Like, how many times do you see a boss that just sort of like, kind of, it looks like he's sliding across the floor because his weight doesn't look like it's a factor to what's going on. But the second part of that is when you're actually trying to fight him, there's no difference in how you engage a boss like that. Because you could be fighting a tree versus fighting a giant creature, because the whole point of a boss fight should be strategic changes in how you're engaging with the combat. And one big problem with Elden Ring characters is you have characters with big weapons who will lift a weapon into the air to telegraph a large attack, but the fucking FOV is so small you can't see the thing that's supposed to telegraph to you that you're supposed to be being hit and dodging your attack. So if you just scale up a character, it won't be a good experience. The reason that this bothers me so much is if you look at older games, way back to the Zelda-style, Mario-style era, bosses were set pieces. You entered a dungeon shaped around the boss, you fought the boss went through phases, the boss was a set piece of the area. As we've gotten bigger games, they're just putting large bosses in an environment that's not really suited for how the boss works. That's fine, leads to some cool gameplay sometimes, but in general, it makes the boss less interesting because it's not engaging with its environment, and it's running animations at the exact same scale and weight that it would if it was smaller. And that'll always look off to you because it'll feel like something that big would not have that movement, you know? And you can see it, and it won't feel as good as a player.
On that note, and to kind of disagree a bit, first off, the boss looks off. I can tell you, I can't see. The boss fills up the entire freaking screen, and I can see half its attacks. So this is the merely Elden Ring experience, by the way. This is why I chose to go for spells. I hate not being able to see what the hell is going on, and the game expects you to dodge away, see the attacks, and then engage with them in a safe manner. But it doesn't really give you the deluxe opportunity to. A lot of players I've seen on streams will straight up run to the boss, not find the points of follow through that the boss has with its attacks, and they will not attack in those windows of opportunity because they don't understand it's a follow through. And it's driving me insane because as a spellcaster, you get to see this way clearer and then you can act on it. But spellcasters are also pulled into this system where I have to use a spell because I have it and I have a limited mana. And if I lose that mana, I'm screwed. And then they don't even want to fight anymore once they run out of mana. So it's like the entire game design forces you to play wrong either way. So that's what I have to say on Elden Ring's giant bosses. But they do put a bit more design decisions into it, especially as you go farther into the game. The second story boss that most players will engage with is in a place full of graveyards, and he ends up in second phase breathing a large fire attack, and the graves, being sturdy buildings, can actually protect you from the fire. But the boss is big and fat, and he rolls around and he smashes the graves. So you end up losing coverage the longer the fight goes on, which is pretty interesting in its own right. Now,
There's a few other bosses as well which have literal columns, and as you fight the boss, they break the columns and similar thing.
Yeah, and there's also a more interesting boss that I found, which is optional. And there's one cave where there are two bosses, and one of them, you enter a room and the floor has a light layer of water. It's like puddles, a big puddle, and you don't see the boss, but you see something moving on the surface of the water, and then behind you, he grabs you and stabs a knife in you. It's an assassin that is invisible, and the only way you can tell he's around is by the water movement on the floor. And when you attack him, he exposes himself briefly. So that's how you try to combo him. But it's a really interesting fight that uses the environment as a set piece to the boss, which I love, just like you mentioned earlier. So the bosses later do get better. There's also a big open field boss where, as part of one of his attacks, he will fly off to the sky and become a meteor landing near you, potentially on you. I died to that like 3 times.
I really got to get my controller working and get in there or get this new one. Hopefully, I think it shows up tomorrow. Get to play. I feel like I'm missing out.
I do think there's a lot of really interesting design lessons, and for all the people who seem to think that I don't like the game, like it is a marvel of development. Like the scale of work and effort and the quality of, like, all the characters are fascinatingly interesting designs, and the amount of times you'll turn a corner and you'll see something genuinely unique. Like, how many games do that, where you enter an area and you'll see a one of a kind enemy that you won't ever see anywhere again, that is an interesting experience. That kind of stuff is really cool, and I do think that they've got the world building and a lot of that stuff down really well. My general issue with the games as a whole is that, one, it's a formula, and so it's down to why you play games. And I play games for character driven stories. In fact, like, for me, my favorite thing is TV shows. I don't like movies. I prefer TV shows, specifically because it is enough breathing room for a story to be told, and characters will have an arc and a journey over the course of the experience. Video games are just TV shows with interaction. They're all the cinematography, all of the benefits, plus you can interact with it. And I find that in games like these, even if it's very hard for me to engage with the story of Elden Ring when it's almost comical that everything is literally just a mad-libbed version of the previous game. Like, the flasks are flasks, but not flasks. The bonfires are bonfires, but not bonfires. Every single element of the game is the same thing with a different name. And that shouldn't detract from something where, because they put so much work into custom characters and an interesting world and a large open map. But it's comical how at the very core of what you're experiencing, the story is like someone took a script and just changed it from one person to another. And it makes it very hard to engage with it past that point,
We talked about it before, and I entirely agree with you on that. It's a problem when you can tell you've played one Souls game, you played all of them. They always have the same rough approach to the story and the same mechanics, so that you can tell, I'm playing a Souls game right now. I can roughly understand what's going on, and I can roughly understand what I'm going to be doing from this point onward. Sequels tend to try and change it, sometimes not very successfully. But Elden Ring is facing a problem where the innovation of the open world is kind of undermined by the mechanics that didn't change, that are way more prevalent.
I also just think this is more of, again, personal thing. I remember being a kid and specifically saying, wouldn't it be really cool someday if there was a game where you could have loads of boss fights? Boss fights were always the hallmark of the game. When I played Zelda as a kid, you're waiting for the next fun boss area. Then, as time went by, you end up getting games like Shadow of the Colossus, and you're like, oh, this is amazing. This is a really cool concept, and more games should just be bosses and bosses. Great. But the thing is, I can't stress this enough, Shadow of the Colossus, every single boss fight is an experience. It's a boxed, scripted set piece with, you enter from a certain door, you experience it with a certain framing, it does something particular, and it unravels a mystery that tells you how you fight the boss by looking at the environment, how you fight, and then you go through the process and you have an experience and it's done. And that is what a boss fight always was to me. And I think it's been misconstrued now that a boss just means a big thing you fight. And I think a lot of the pageantry around the actual experience of fighting a boss has been lost now that we've got games that are entire franchises where it's lots of big things. Like, it's not interesting to me to fight a big dragon, because a big dragon every single time is going to be sweep at the leg a few times, it'll fly around, you can maybe shoot in the air if you have something, it'll land, and you'll do the same thing again. There's like, oh, and if it breathes fire, find cover somewhere. And like, that's not a boss fight. That is just a creature. He just happens to be larger than the other creatures. I think it really has gotten to the point that it sounds good on paper, and I really love the world building and all the art and stuff. But I look at the games and just think it's not like each one of these doesn't feel like a unique experience. The one thing that got me into the Souls games ever for the first time is that one boss. I forgot which one it was, where there's a giant sword. You enter an area and there's just a giant sword, and you're like, that's really cool. And you walk up, and then a bloody giant wolf walks over, picks up the giant sword, and starts swinging at you. And I thought, now that is a set piece. They showed me a giant sword. I didn't know what to expect, and then I'm fighting a bloody giant wolf. That is so cool, and there's not enough of those kind of moments, I think, anymore.
Speaking about that giant sword and wolf, Elden Ring has a dragon that breathes a sword, holds it in its teeth, and then descends on you, cutting you apart with the giant sword that it how do you say breathe in past tense? It's just, that was the single most epic attack I've had to deal with in Elden Ring so far, and it wasn't even a story boss. It was just a side boss. A story boss literally becomes a freaking meteor on you on a beach where there's nothing to hide from. But that sword breathing, best part. Boss fight wise.
There was a question in chat, if you guys are interested in taking
like
it, by the
one.
way, about
That's a good question.
what do you think is a good way to handle a lot of enemies attacking a player at the same time so that they don't feel overwhelmed or die too fast? So I think it's probably something that a lot of people have to deal with, where you got just a ton of enemies in your game. Anybody have thoughts on this one?
The
first answer is don't.
No, I mean, you can. The Ascent does it quite well.
Yeah, I think I don't have an issue with that. I think that this is going to be the same answer for like 90% of similar questions. The answer is player choice and agency. It's how many decisions do I have at one time to deal with a problem that I have? And a lot of games will have something like, I have a minigun, and then I have a sword. And if you swarm enemies at me, the minigun, I can use that, but it's not going to be as effective as slashing with the sword. So effectively, I have no choice. Like, you're not giving me engagement because I have two options. One option's good close, one option's good far. I'll use the right one for the right task. So in a scenario like that, the answer is pretty simply give players something they can do to make a decision about how to resolve it. For example, if I'm being swarmed by a lot of enemies, two choices could make that really fun, really simply. One, some kind of leap into the air / reposition ability. And second, an AoE, like knock things back ability. Suddenly, now, no matter what I'm using, whether it's guns or swords or anything, I can decide, do I engage further or do I exit the situation? Suddenly I have choice. So it doesn't actually matter about the enemies at all. It matters about what choice have you given the player to engage with or change or whatever. The general term for this is possibility space. And so ask yourself at any one time, what can the player do with the problem I've given them? If you want a really good example of this, the trick is to throw them problems that require them to think laterally. So if you're going to throw a swarm of enemies at them, have at least one healer off to the side or an archer or something shooting at them. Suddenly, they now have to think about two problems at once. They can solve this one or they can solve that one, and they have to engage. And that gets the really fun player optimization, where you now have to engage with, like, I can kill all these enemies, but there's a sniper shooting at me over there. It makes a lot more sense for me to get past these guys, kill him before engaging with these, because, otherwise we'll be shot the whole time. So suddenly you've got multiple opportunities. Or if you can kill them fast enough, you can kill them first, and so on. So the point is choice. Give the players multiple ways to attack a problem, and it doesn't really matter then. It doesn't matter what problem you throw at them, providing they can attack it in interesting ways.
The game The Ascent does that quite nicely. You're going to go into an area where you're going to get swarmed, so you set up, and as you say, you make the abilities to jump and destroy loads of enemies and push them all back in one fell swoop, or you equip your minigun instead of your more electro sniper rifle that you're using with the singular robots that are coming at you in another place.
Or I think the best thing the Ascent does is one of the abilities is you can tag an enemy, and if you kill the enemy, he explodes in a radius, tagging nearby enemies. And if you kill those, tagging a radius. And so it incentivizes you to specifically play in a play style where if you tag a boss, he's really hard to take down. So you want to tag a weak enemy, kite him to a boss, kill him, which will trigger the side effect, the trigger to the nearby enemies. So that's a way of taking a really simple mechanic and turning it into a really fun strategic. I need him to be here to attack him, to get him to blow up, to attack this guy. And yeah, it adds extra dimensionality to what you're doing.
Yeah, the only annoying thing with the Ascent and going back to the boss thing was the fact that some of those bosses you have to fight off screen because of the camera. Yeah.
So I just want to touch about the core problem that you guys are describing, which is stress management, which is to say, in a genre that would befit many enemies attacking you at once, bullet hell. These games have a problem where the player is presented with a space that is threatened by a lot of things, and they have to choose their path carefully so that the stress doesn't cover everywhere and they get hit, which means they need some level of control on where to move. And that is where the stress management part comes in by naming. And as you try to not overwhelm player, you're trying to reduce the stress management. If I put 1,000 stormtroopers on a single piece of rock far away from you, even if it's 1,000 bullets, it's not much of a threat because they all come from the same direction, which means as long as you can move laterally from that rock, you will never be hit. But if the enemies are coming at you from all places, that guarantees that at least one of them will probably hit you, overwhelm you, and you will lose. So what a lot of action games do, especially shooters or those with limited field of view around the player, they'll remove the priority of attacks from enemies behind the player and make them attack less frequently, or give special warnings and have longer delays so that the player isn't threatened from everywhere at once. Shooter games tend to be really, really, really prone to this, so they do more of that than other games. But the recent God of War...
Taking The Last of Us, like you'll actually hear people say, flank him, get around the other side, these kinds of statements, because they want to be very clear to you that you know that the combat is changing the way it's engaging with you.
Yeah, and the main problem is you don't want to overwhelm the player, then reduce the amount of stress management they have to deal with. Give them outs. It's not about possibility space as much as it's about there is a safe spot to move towards too. If you have a lot of enemies, reduce the amount of stress they give off. And this is literally the only way where you're saying it's overwhelmed. There's stress, you have to reduce it somehow. So this is why I said don't put too much stress.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because the other part too is it's like it just stops being engaging, because if you've got a lot of strong enemies, the optimal strategy is just not be in line of sight, which enforces bunkering, which means you're going to end up sitting in a semi-optimal spot doing nothing, like you were saying. And so I think a good way to solve this as well is not with swarms, but in general. Speaking of shooters, Gears of War did this really well, where if you're crouched around a knee-high wall, you'll basically have enemies will push you out of cover. Like, the enemies have chainsaws on their guns, which means if you see guys running closer towards you, they're going to close the gap on cover, which means you can't just hover in a spot and stay there. You're going to have to be moving, but again, they'll give you positions to move so you can circle your enemies. So keeping the player on their toes, but in a respectable way, is definitely a good idea.
Yeah. Also, on that note, Tom Clancy's The Division has enemies that will specifically throw grenades at you if you're behind cover, so that you have to get out and try to move, but they're about to shoot you, so you have to move strategically between covers the entire time. This is what the game tries to promote, so that you'll have a better experience. Also, on the term of giving players outs, one really common tool that action games will use is immune frames and massive power spikes. You may have 1,000 enemies shooting at you, but there is this one legendary sword 5 seconds away from you that if you grab will give you 10 seconds of murdering everything in sight and moving at 10 times the speed. Kingdom Hearts 2 had a fight where you're against 1,000 enemies, And what you could do is you could literally grab the enemies and start hurling them at each other, and you're entirely immune to damage as you do it, and you end up slaughtering the entire 1,000 without taking a single hit, because you can keep interacting with them by means of grabbing and going through them like that.
There's a mention of GDC talk on combat in Doom. I'm gonna have to check that out too.
That is a very good talk. And I think the core takeaway, because it's really not obvious on the face of it, people don't realize this. Most shooters disincentivize you from getting close. If you're low on health, you're incentivized to go take cover. Halo is the epitome of this. If games have a health bar, then there's no real strategy getting further away or closer. You just have to play safe until you kill something and move on. Games like Halo have this push-pull, where you fight till you're low, you duck into cover, you regen, and you come back. And that cycle is sort of like getting close and covering. What Doom does differently, and the reason why it's considered such a frenetic shooter, is when you're low, the optimal strategy is to kill something quickly. Because if you kill something and get close to it, use one of the specials, you will get health from doing so. So in that last minute panicked state, in a game like Halo, your optimal like instinct is to run and hide somewhere. In a game like Doom, it's to run at the enemy. So that's what they mean by the push forward combat, is that the game itself, like systemically, is designed to get you in that panic state to run forward, not backwards, which is so counter to how a lot of those games work.
Also, on that note, with the health specifically, card games are another great point of this, because in card games, health is a resource that you have to learn to expend, because it expands your possibility space way more. There are cards that will explicitly say, if you expend 1,000 health, you gain insert something very, very strong. Or if you decide to tank one of the enemy's hits and not sacrifice one of your units for that hit, then you have the opportunity to do some way crazier combo later on in the game. Giving the players risky choice and rewarding them with that is way more engaging than just letting them cower behind, I have thing, I don't want to lose it. Loss aversion is a very, very big topic in most games, and it's actually being exploited as one of the biggest dark patterns in almost any live service game ever, which is, we are giving you something, you don't want to lose it, pay us to keep it somehow. Limited inventories, pay to expand them, and so on and so forth. You're being given... go ahead.
I was going to say, and it's actually interesting because it's the inversion is a good idea to keep a note of as well in games. For example, you don't think about it this way, but if you can give someone a buff to their numbers one way or another. You can either say you're getting a 10% bonus on something or a 10% detraction on what you're doing. And you may not think of it that way when you're designing it, but you want to, where possible, pivot numbers so that... give a good example. I forgot what game it was. It might have been World of Warcraft. It was something where if you played for too long in sequence, they would give you a debuff as like a punishment for basically, you shouldn't play for so long, take a break and come back. And everyone despised it. It's like you're like punishing me for playing the game. But then you take the exact same numbers and the exact same mechanic, but you invert it and say, if you haven't played for X number of hours and you log in fresh, you get a reward for being like first game of the day. Suddenly, same thing, very engaging. But it's like, even if the numbers are exactly the same, the point is, from a philosophy perspective, people are super loss averse. And there's a lot of really interesting things about even money, where people will be super disinterested in losing even a small amount of money compared to massive potential wins. If you start giving people odds to like flip a coin, and you track down how far they're willing to go in terms of when they'll give up on trading with you, they'll leave long before it's actually disadvantageous. Like, you could give people odds of like 10-1, and it still won't matter if they feel like they're going to lose more than they want to lose, which might even be a very small amount of money. People don't think optimally for math or for how they approach stuff, because once it's theirs, it has an extra agency and kind of earnings to it. So from a game design perspective, the point is, if you ever want to punish the player or debuff them, try to figure out how you frame what you're doing. Like, again, games like Elden Ring, if you stand in poison, ticks up thing, you get bad status effect. Like, the angle at which you approach it, do you apply an effect or do you subtract from something, will change the psychology of the player.
To put another icon on that is very close to my heart, not in a fun way. Terraria 1.4 had one of the only ever negative stat changes depending on what you're doing. And it got so much flack. We didn't expect any level of this amount of animosity to it. That on day one, the first thing we had to address before any other technical issue was getting rid of that specific portion of the game and just first capping it off that it can't be negative at all, and then trying to make better on it so that it doesn't have any other issues. And the main thing was, for reasons that I won't get into too much, the game got a luck system, and we ended up giving you good luck when you used torches of specific biomes in those biomes. So if you had a jungle torch and you put it in the jungle, you'd get better luck, and if you put a desert torch in the jungle, you get worse luck. And because it could get below 1.0, even though there were way more capacities for positive luck. There was one source in the game for bad luck and two sources, but this was the one primary source for bad luck, and it was just putting a torch of a different color in a certain space. It got so out of control. We just had to cap it, and then we added Torch God to the game so that you can always have the right torch from a normal one. Just putting a normal torch in the jungle becomes a jungle torch. That solved the luck problems there. But it's like how you frame things and how much context you give it really changes how players will accept it. And to be fair, luck is a great system. It can boost player potency by a ton. So there you go. Good luck. Only good luck. Don't add bad luck. Just good luck. Terraria by nature, we're trying to just empower the players. So
on the dark patterns thing too, this is just one last one. This is one of my favorite sort of psychological experiments. They did a test with a bunch of families, and the idea is that they knocked on some houses and they asked. So there's a school nearby, and the children are having trouble crossing the road. So it's dangerous or whatever. So what we want to do is paint a huge big stop sign on the side of your house. Is that okay? Because your house is like a perfect line of sight. It'd be really helpful. And everyone's like, no, I don't want a giant stop sign on the side of my house. It says, okay, fine. Well, then can we put a normal like pole stop sign in front of your house? And that they'll say yes to. But the approach is, if you approach and said, can I put a stop sign in front of your house? They'll say equally, no. So the idea is it's very easy psychologically to set a pivot point and a framing device. And so the idea of setting a big promise or like a big problem that they're now saying no to. There's also this thing, people psychologically don't like saying no multiple times in a row. That's why a lot of these sales agencies will specifically have a rule that says they must say no 3 times, because it's more psychologically uncomfortable for someone to say no in consecutive terms. They feel like they want to help you and give you something. So a lot of the sales advice will be to ask you something you're never going to say yes to force you to out and nowhere to, and then finally ask you something that they want to actually sell you and convince you back onto those onto purchasing that, because you feel like you've conceded enough that you feel good about what your decision is, and you've and they've whittled down to kind of an even ground. There's a lot of this stuff, and the same with like if you give somebody something, they're more inclined to like you or to help you. And so the other trick was the idea at museums where you'd have a table full of free bottles of water, and you'd hand someone a free bottle of water from the table, and they're more likely to then lend you money, even though the free bottle was there. They could have reached for it themselves. But if you give it to them first, they feel a sense of they owe you for what you've done. All of these little things are just psychology to keep in mind. Sometimes they're done for negative purposes, but from a game design perspective, never forget that the whole point of the game is an experience. Everything else aside, whether it's a good or bad one doesn't matter. A lot of people think about games as being fun, and that's the objective. Fun isn't the objective. There's lots of games that aren't fun. It's not about fun. It's about the engagement, the experience you're having one way or another. And so the point is, try to track that. A lot of people never stop to actually think minute to minute, like look at your game and go, what is the experience someone is having? If you're just slapping mechanics in a space, there's no experience there. You're hoping they will make their own game. But if you can figure out what that experience is, figure out what you want, you can then get into the idea of fatigue that we talked about earlier and start to track that flow. And that's why some games like Mario seem to just endlessly be fun from start to finish, because they have like really clinically placed positions of strength, difficulty, and depth, and it forces you to be in a constant flow state of things are harder and easier and harder that never feels too fatiguing. So yeah, try to understand who your audience is and structure that flow.
To touch on all of this topic, a person on Jason's story server, Lalo, shared this site through the weekend, and it covers a lot of the dark patterns that we talked about here, and even more. There's the reciprocity, sorry, it keeps escaping me, and other topics here, and they all have been used in games to some degree. They're not always a dark pattern. It depends on what you do with them. The biggest thing is giving players endowed values and then expecting them to become attached to the game that you're making out of it. Because as they get more attached, they will justify spending in games, and this is where the dark pattern really takes hold. You're getting the player to spend more time, which means they think about the game more, and they tell other people, they signal to other players, this is worth spending time on by the nature of the fact that I am spending time on it. And the people themselves, by being given the mindshare of this game exists, might get dragged into it and might get dragged into spending in it or getting other people to buy it. This is why many games will just put time gates or time wastes in the games that you play. Also, specifically, just to touch on the engagement versus fun, Elden Ring has a very harsh world, but if you get to the round table, there is specifically an NPC that will hug you. You can literally go to that NPC and ask for an embrace, a hug, and it will buff you. And players are encouraged to go there and do it multiple times through their gameplay. Every time they visit a place, there might be people who are just going and do that. There's a joke about the streamer who is addicted to hugs too. There. So the entire thing is, the world is harsh. Here's a hug, which is an experience, not necessarily a fun one, because you have to have the entire dark world for it. Also, the game wastes a lot of time. You can't pause it, which means you're playing on the times that are convenient for the game. And this wastes your time, but you're not feeling it as much as you're being told, yeah, just wait 5 seconds. You're waiting the 5 seconds by doing something like getting away from danger. And this increases the amount of time you spend, makes you more attached, because I've spent 24 hours in the game, now I must finish it, and so on and so forth.
It's also like one of the ones on that page that's really worth highlighting. I think it's my favorite one to talk about is artificial scarcity, because what a lot of people don't realize is you have to really think about this. When you're playing a game, they made the game. So when there's a problem in the game, they made the problem and they're selling you the solution. So every single time you're hitting one of these walls where something's grinding or taking too long or frustrating, but there's like a really nice thing in the store you could buy. I'm not even talking about financially, like for real money. I specifically mean like even in a game like Minecraft, the gameplay mechanic is such that we want using your hands / a wooden pickaxe to be painful. The point of that exercise is we have decided to make it hard to do to incentivize further high walks up the tree. So as a game kind of design concept, like keep in mind that this isn't just like, oh, it just happens to be weaker and better stuff makes it better. No, they dialed in so that it would be the right amount of painful. That's kind of the point. So a lot of games, it's very interesting if you look at it from that perspective, step back and say, I have to find X number of this particular resource. But like they want you to do that. And what's the balancing weight of that work versus the reward? If the reward means I get to do this 20% faster, have I really won anything? Or am I just now in a funnel where now I'm going to be continuing down this path with no actual reward inside? So it can be, it works. That's the problem. It's like deceptively, because you feel like you've got a sunk cost then at that stage. And there's tons of evidence. And like, I forgot which study this was too, but there was one that talked about putting somebody through to join a secret society, and they gave them these arduous, horrible tasks to join. And then once they did join, there's like, they purposely made it suck. It was a horrible, terrible, like boring thing. But then they asked people afterwards to rate their experience and how valuable the club they joined was. And it universally got 70s and 80s, because people will disproportionately weight They're like, oh, well, I made it here. I did all of this work. It must have been worth it. Otherwise, I'm an idiot. So of course it's good. It has to be good, and they'll talk themselves into it. So there's a major disconnect. Once you've started spending this much time plowing for resources, you'll hit a point where to admit that it's a waste of time is unfathomable. You have to just keep going. And so a lot of these things will stack psychologically to keep you engaged in these horrible loops.
Also, if you ever attached a number positively to something, or rather an experience to a specific amount of time that you had to do, you will end up automatically favoring it from the similarity to other things that try to replicate it. And this actually comes up with Nier Automata and Ocarina of Time. I think the developer for Yoko Taro for Nier specifically said that he took a timer and checked how long it took him to move from one city to another in Ocarina of Time, and then he made sure it takes this exact amount of time in moving from two specific spots in Nier, just so that you will have the feeling that it's like that game. So there's that. Also, on the dark pattern of this, games will use candies and cute things because people are attached to tasty and cute things positively, and just by seeing that as they play, they will feel better. So there you go. There's why Candy
Why
Crush.
do you think Soda games have dogs you can pet? It serves no other purpose. It serves nothing for the gameplay other than it engages you with a feeling of that you have that engagement, what's going on, and you're emotionally positively weighting the experience.
And dogs are better than cats.
There are respectable bunnies.
Cool. Well, you guys have any other topics you wanted to make sure we discuss this week? We've hit quite a bit. I don't know if there's anything else important or big that we should cover today. Nothing? Any last questions you want to take from the chat?
There is actually two more things that we didn't discuss that I mentioned earlier, which is your customization video.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that one. Let's dive into that. What did you think of that one?
Well, what I think is you're really just aggressive dark patterns with your cute animals to start. I mean, there you go. Horrible first-person example of what we just talked about.
Oh, that's funny. The funny thing, the cute animals is actually just because that's what my daughter wanted. She really wanted a pony game. So the whole reason I started making that thing was that she really wanted to play a pony game. And I went through Steam and just started downloading a bunch of pony games. But she's 4, and every game that I downloaded is just full of dialogues, full of text that she can't read or understand, and menus. There's very little for her to actually do. I basically have to play the game, and she just tells me what to do because it's just way out of her league. So I decided I would throw together a quick little game where she could do the things that she wanted to do in a pony game, which are name it. She wants to tell me what the name of the pony is, and put stuff on it and see other ponies. Oh, and it should be able to eat. That's pretty much it. So it doesn't need a big text or anything else.
She wants a Tamagotchi pony.
Yeah. She wants to be able to take her pony around, go see the other ponies, try on their cool pony clothes, and eat things. And then I can put in little mini games or something.
If the pony doesn't eat, does it die?
No. So that's one of the things I've realized working with a toddler is that most things don't matter. Like, I want to keep it as simple as possible. Just limit what you can do to eating and dressing up your pony. And lots of voiceovers, I think.
Are you going to add things to this game that give her hints on how to behave? Like, are you going to have it so that she can only do certain things with the pony if she tidies the area around the pony? So she gets ingrained that we need to tidy things up in order to get rewards and stuff like that.
Pony gets sad if you haven't cleaned your room.
Yeah.
Yes, Dave. That's exactly what's going to happen. Yes,
that's what I would do.
No, I really like that idea, though. I want to make it something fun that she can play, and easy enough for a toddler, but without overthinking it and without it being something that you have to be 12 and no longer interested in to play, because she can't read dialogues and click through menus and all that other crap. I just need her in there playing with the ponies. So enough about me blabbing about it. Your thoughts on the the actual customization stuff?
Yeah, so great stuff on interacting with both the materials and the objects as you use the customization things. I actually haven't seen the approach of using a class array in the component in the menu. But so I am a stickler for customization. I analyze every system, every customization system I see, like down to the core. I open the game up. I try to figure out everything about the game on how it interacts with things, especially in the more advanced customization games. And I've gotten into this mindset where if I don't see certain things being applicable, I will go crazy nitpicky about it. So, with that in mind, let me rip open your customization system.
No,
please.
go for it.
So the first thing is you don't have a good way to serialize the choices that you've made.
Right.
You gave them names, but if should the name change or should the array spot change, etc., you don't have the capacity to restore the state. You don't get to say, I gave you 5 skins, but you wanted the 6th one. Let me add the 6th one and load the game, and it also kept your choice. And what choice is the current one?
Right.
You mentioned that it might be better to have most of these things as assets. This is exactly why, because the assets are serializable. They are serialized assets, and you have some ID to attach to what you're looking for. Even if all of its content changes, it points to the exact same point. So this is why the assets are important. Now, beyond that, certain choices are not always applicable with other choices. For example, there are games which will say you lose one arm. That's a part of customization. Therefore, if you're wearing a pair of gloves, don't show that other glove.
Well, or helmets and masks is a great one. Sometimes you can have a mask and glasses, but a helmet would be replacing that. So yeah, that comes up a lot.
Yeah, or overalls with pants. Specifically where overalls are supposed to take both the top and the bottom slot of the inventory. So that kind of thing not addressed at all with the customization system. And of course, you could try and simulate it with how you have the content there, but it's not as easy. Dynamic loading offset content. Games, as they get big, will not be able to have everything in the scene. Especially the bigger games like Elden Ring right now, which has like over 100 armor pieces. You can't have a player
Wait. So you're saying there's not a game object character in Elden Ring with 1,000 helmets under it in a hierarchy tree that are turned off?
They
when
don't
you
do
get them
that.
on, no?
They don't do that and then do it for every character.
Yeah, so that part, you have to have a way to dynamically load them in and load them out. But if they have to exist in the scene, in the class, in the array that you had, that can't happen. So again, this is why they have assets, and this is why you want to be able to load assets like that. On customizations for specific features on the things, you allowed material switching, but if you want to be able to customize colors, specific materials might have different needs for these colors. For example, Code Vein lets you customize a certain colors amount depending on how many how many segments an accessory you put on has. So, for example, you could put on glasses, and the glasses have rims and they have the shades, and you could have a different color for every shade. So you need 3 customizations of colors, and each one of these has to be serialized some way, and also has to have default values so that you can revert back to it. And I know I'm getting a bit out there, but there's a lot of things that go into how to serialize all of this, and it's a really, 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 really big thing.
Yeah, I think for the serializing, one of the reasons I didn't talk about it at all yet was because I felt like it depends a lot on how you're actually doing the customization. If the customization is just through like equipped items, then you're not necessarily serializing the visuals, you're serializing the inventory and items. And if it's like I said, unlockable things, versus stuff that's just hard swapping. Like in there, it really just did like a simple hard swap of them. When it's unlockable, we've got to serialize out, like I said, different set of data on what's available versus what's actually selected and shit. But yeah, no, these are all great points. I think one day I'd like to do a big, long, like 2-hour customization video that dives into a lot more stuff than depth and some performance things, because it's also super unperformant. The one that I put up there. I'm trying to keep it simple. But continue on. I want to hear more.
So on that note, just swapping objects, they didn't actually. It only works because you have the everything in the hierarchy at the same time. But if you were to actually add other objects into the hierarchy at runtime by loading them in, you must match the bone structures of these objects together, because otherwise they won't animate together properly. Just spawning another object doesn't make it animate together. So there's a lot of code that goes into doing that, and.
I think that's a video I'm going to do sometime soon with like items in hands, and probably just do it like with weapons and different equipable items that you can hold that have different shapes and sizes that have to kind of adjust. I think it'd be another interesting one.
Yeah, but I meant more like if you have a cloth and it has to bend, and that cloth has to be rigged to the character. Yes. Therefore, you have to have some binding process as you spawn it to do that. But clothes might need different bones each. For example, a cape needs cape bones, and a jacket does not need cape bones. So does the base character have all of these, or do you have to dynamically find out which new bones do you have to attach, or do you just keep copies of every single bone for every single cloth that you need? Game design for these systems, the implementation, absolute topic that should be covered on GDC sometime, somewhere from these big developers, because as you try and explore how other games do it, Code Vein, for example, will have actual bones for all of the clothes, specifically because they get used in attacks. They manually animated them all so that as you attack in a certain way, your cape will flow in a certain way. So depending on which jacket or whatever you have, they actually all use the same bones, which is really, really nice and fun to see.
Andrew, yours are like that too, right? Your armor sets and clothes and stuff?
Yeah, it copies the skinned mesh render. So when we bring in a new armor, it's got the same bone structure as the character. And when you bring it in, the script also basically relinks the bones from the armor to the bones of the character, so they actually can render or can animate. But the thing I'm trying to figure out now, and Uri, maybe you already know the solution, is on the question of, okay, if I don't want to go back to the base character, like let's say we have a beard and I want that beard to have a couple bones in it because it's a really long beard and it's got, heavy weighted things. If I don't want to reskin set up the character to have the bones for that beard, can I then move the bones from the beard onto the character and then, create new bones basically on the character, then move the bones over from the beard that I just instantiated and other stuff? I haven't figured that one out.
Yeah. So just to get into how rendering works in Unity, a renderer has a bunch of transforms which it uses in order to decide this vertex needs to be deformed this way. If you have a point in space, just to figure it out nicely, let's use an example of an arm. The arm, I just want to get it on screen, might have points here, here, and here on the shoulder, and they're points in space. Now we have a skin that says, I am 1 centimeter away from the arm, I am 2 centimeters away from the arm, I am at this rotation relative to the arm, always like just a bit forward and a bit top, and a bit forward and a bit bottom. These are all just specific to the points, not to anything else. The points are relative to each other, so you don't have much more of a connection than that. If this shoulder gets bigger, all the distances from this point get bigger, and then because that got bigger by scale, then this will also get bigger by scale, etc., etc. So the entire concept is really, really simple. You have a beard, it has bones, it's only related to the beard bones. It doesn't matter if they're part of the character, if they're part of whatever else. When you're saying switch the connections around for anything else, you're saying just use that other piece of information. But you don't really have to. You just have to figure out how that other piece of information wants to get, the original piece of information wants to get where it should be. So you could just take the beard, keep the entire bones as they are, and literally reparent them to the base character. And this will work perfectly fine. If the beard had its own, say, head bone, some part of the beard actually used the head, which is on the character, you could relink just that and it will work. Just make sure that the parenting is also there, because the beard was a child of the head, the beard head. So if you delete that, it stops moving with a beard head because it's not there anymore. So you can just parent that to the normal head, and then you have the entire rig working perfectly. Conceptually it's really simple. It's just the implementation can have a bazillion different small details. For example, if your beard head had a component on it, for example, dynamic bones, if you've ever used that, they will use the child hierarchy and will move it around. But if you delete the beard head, you don't have the dynamic bone anymore. So for that one, you might just want to keep the beard head and just make it a child of the head. They will sit in the same position. They will be clones of the bone, but you get to keep all the components and whatever you had in the prefab for it. This is the way I currently use, which ends up really, really messy if you're equipping 30 different items. So I call out bones that don't have components on them. I actually have a search that just eliminates unnecessary bones and lets me keep clones of the normal ones. And I have just a human skeleton with no extra bones at all, and all the cloths have their own bones, and they use that. I also started looking into how to use Magica Cloth with my approach, because I equip like 50 items. I have code. So I like asymmetrical clothing, and I freaking hate when I can't flip the cloth around. So I ended up writing an entire script that gets the mesh, does transform to flip all the things around, keep the entire vertex order properly, also do the matrices for the bindings for bones, just to make sure it's all perfectly okay. And then I just make a cloth for one side of the body, and I have a flip of customization that says, do you want to flip the cloth horizontally? And if I click that, the cloth gets flipped horizontally. So you can equip different gloves for every hand, or different socks, or different boots, or whatever you want.
Nice.
Customization is fun.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So speaking of customization, I think Beardhead is going to be my next gamer tag next time.
About beard, I actually have a beard right now. It's a shade, but it's working. It's a bit slimmer than David's.
David, on your beard, do you want to really quickly tell everybody what your new video was this week that's out? I've got it up here.
It's about creating an amazing looking beard. It involves sculpting, which you could do in many packages today, and having a really good set of tools just to get the angles exactly right.
For your perfect beard. I love that it's not loading for me either, so it's definitely believable.
Yeah, isn't it?
Okay. Keep your weapons at the ready, right?
Yeah, exactly. So for this video, I'm just trying to remember what I did. That's right. Yeah. So it's screen fading in Unity. So last week was screen fading in Unity with URP, just showing you how to do a screen fade between transitions. The rest, instead of using planes or geometry or whatever. This week's one is showing you how to use that screen fade with the timeline editor, because I had a lot of people asking me how to use the timeline editor, how to customize it. So I figured I was doing screen fading anyway. I didn't want to spend a ton of time making a new tutorial with loads of assets, so I just kind of chucked it on the end. So if you're interested in timelines or you're interested in screen fading, this video is for you.
This is a lot about timeline, it looks like.
Yeah, it's mostly about timeline, because I covered screen fading in the first one, and this one's really just how to customize the timeline to be able to change things like the color of something, and then actually doing the curves on the timeline editor to change that color. So a lot of people don't realize there's a little button on the timeline editor next to your track that you can press that actually drops it down and gives you the curves. So you can see the curves and you can actually manipulate those and add keys to it. It's actually a bit finicky to add keys onto that one, so you can actually double click on the actual curve in the track, and that will actually open the animation editor, and then you can edit that instance of that animation.
That's cool.
And change
I
things
didn't
like
know that.
colors and intensities and all the rest of it. So yeah, I show you quickly how to do markers, and then use the iNotify system to send notifications to your classes to be able to do all that sort of thing with iNotify.
But the real question is, with your markers, do you have custom icons to your markers or not?
I don't on this video, no, because
Oh.
custom icons is another video I've got coming down. Have I got them on this one? No, I haven't. But yeah, you can add custom icons to it. The video's 45 minutes long. If I have to add everything to it, it's going to be hours. I tried playing with a video that was like 2 hours long in there on how to build a rig, how to manipulate a rig and do VR hands in like when you're doing a game jam really, really quickly. But nobody watched it through the end, so I'm not doing that anymore.
A
so
long video has got to be how to make a game, start to finish.
I will do it. Yes, okay.
That's
I'll
what
make
people
how to
will
make a
watch on a
game
long
video.
video.
Everybody wants it. So this one, markers. Then I go through how to build curves. Then I show you how to edit curves, and then I show you right at the very end. So everybody has to watch right to the very end and subscribe and like. There's a little bit that I show you how to create a window on your screen view, and then change a color on that screen view. Because to preview the screen fade in the screen view, I actually show this little window that pops up, and it's a little rectangle, and that actually changes color and produces the fade and gives you a little number on how much it's faded. So you can still see the scene in your scene view. I don't render over it, but you know when you're actually in your timeline, you've actually rendered out completely. So that's all in there. And then next week's video is going to be on Wordle.
Yeah, that'll be a good one.
Because I was getting on a plane the other day and I finished Wordle and I wanted to do more Wordles, so I basically wrote Wordle in Unity in half an hour and then played it on the plane for the next hour until I got really bored of it and realized that one of the benefits of Wordle is that it has a 24-hour break between each game, because if you constantly try and play it over and over again, it's horrible. And then the video after that is going to be the fact that I got so pissed off on the plane with this that I actually wrote something to solve it. So I built Wordle, and then I just had a button that just done attempts, and it just basically solved it for you on each of the rows, because yeah, that's what you do when you're a coder.
Yeah, make it automated.
I just opened the. I just right click the website, download the JS file, which is all of the words in it. Just play it on your own computer locally.
But I was on the plane by this point, and I had no Wi-Fi. There was no downloading. There was literally. Well, I had Unity, and I was bored. And then the wife looked over, and she's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, you like Wordle, I like Wordle, so I'm creating Wordle." And she's like, "Any changes to it?" I went, "No, I'm just going to rip it off and show people how to do it
and become a millionaire." Now you're rich, right? You copied it, and now you're rich.
No,
you copied it but made it better, right?
No,
that's how you do it.
I made it so you could press a big button that says attempt that literally does it for you, so you'd never have to play it again.
You made it better.
Yeah, that did make it better.
Andrew, but I guess before we leave, we got a minute left. You mentioned the sale. You want to tell everybody what that was real quick?
Well, there's the Ukraine Mega Bundle on the Asset Store. And it looks like, I just loaded it a couple minutes ago, it looks like it's about to pass $300,000 donations to charities. It's almost there.
Oh, wow. Okay. I think I've got a link for that in the description as well.
Yeah, it's on the Asset Store homepage too. Can't miss it. Mega Bundle, 100% of the revenue goes to some charities, and Infinity PBR has a package in there as well. So.
Yep, definitely a good bundle. It was like $40, and you get a ridiculous amount of stuff and support charity. So,
or if you're some people, $1,000. You go to the top 10 contributors.
I saw that was one of the few where people were paying a lot. Usually, I'll try to pay like $100 on those just to pop my name up to the top. But then these were like there were a lot of people paying a lot on those. So
there was.
All right. Let me drop the link for Dave's video in chat real quick and give everybody a second to guess what color lightsaber I actually made. Did I tell you guys already? I hope I did.
You told me, so I know.
Oh, it's cheating.
I think you were playing with it yesterday when we were chatting, but I can't.
I actually put it together. It was pretty cool at Disneyland. Definitely worth it. Anybody got a guess? All right, I'll just turn it on. It's purple to match everything else. Plus, that's the one that got the most votes. I put up a YouTube poll to see what would get the most votes, and
The part where I talk about how it's the color of corruption in Terraria.
There's actually a great, if you're interested in that, as a side note, Rasputin, there's a great video on literally called Color of Corruption. And it talks about this topic and how you may not have noticed it from a game design perspective, that purple is the color of corruption. Why is it? And how it is actually, it's not an arbitrary decision. There's an interesting look at how it applies to nature and various things. Check that video out if you're interested. Color of Corruption. Very good.
Definitely sounds interesting too. All right, you gave me a lot of videos to watch. All right, I'll swing this thing around later. I'm gonna end up smacking myself in the face or hitting something. So, anyway,
The Elden Ring experience.
it's it's already died once. That was the weird part. I brought it home and like within 2 hours the battery was dead. The batteries were dead. So it seems like it's good now. I don't know. We'll see. I got a weird Star Wars obsession with a bunch of random stuff. I'm still waiting on my Terraria sword to show up so I can put it up there. And then I'll put them like one above each other and then have a sword fight with them. I think that the steel one will probably win.
I mean, yeah, probably. I'm still waiting for my show. My, the jacket.
It'll be there soon, I hope. If not,
Yeah.
I'll send some more. Cool. All right. Anybody got any last words or should we just say goodbye?
A
sure.
small call out for I Heart GameDev. He just had a good video today about the command pattern. I recommend that if you don't know the pattern very well, you go watch it. It's really comprehensive and it covers a lot of good uses of the pattern.
That is a very good point. I'm going to go watch that video later too. I'm going to drop that in the chat too. So everybody can go check it out. It's on my list of videos to check out. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, for coming out and joining. Make sure you hit the like, subscribe, and share buttons. Go check out Jason's coffee page, Dave's new video. I got a video somewhere. If you're subscribed, you'll see it. And go check out the bundle and everything else. All right. We'll see you all next week. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.